Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Very good afternoon, Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Finance of Republic of Indonesia and all Minister of Finance of the Asian member countries, the Honorable Bapak Suminto, Director General of Budget, Financing and Risk Management of Indonesia, our prominent speakers, moderators, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to welcome all of you in Jakarta on high-level dialogue on promoting sustainable infrastructure development by enhancing collaborative effort between government and private sectors. My name is Rima Budiarti from Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. It's my honor to be your master of ceremony for today's event. First of all, let us express our warmest and most sincere welcome to all of you to Jakarta, Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, infrastructure financing is main key to achieve sustainable development and growth. But unfortunately, the positive impact of infrastructure development doesn't always match the level of fundraising required. The innovative financing models is expected to attract more investment through various financing schemes and also sources. And for this purpose, the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia is organizing high-level dialogue today. Today's dialogue consists of two panel sessions. The first is panel 1, the innovative infrastructure financing, key enablers and challenges. And the second, panel 2, the innovative financing models. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start our dialogue today with the panel 1, high-level panel, innovative infrastructure financing, key enablers and challenges. My pleasure to introduce our moderator, Bapak Timothy Marbun. He is known as one of the best news personality communication specialists in Indonesia with 16 years of experiences in broadcasting media as national TV news anchors and executive producers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bapak Timothy Marbun.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for joining with us today. I am very honored to be sitting here today with our panelists, and I guess therefore let's just invite our speakers who will be joining us today here live. Thank you very much for everyone for your time here in Jakarta, Indonesia, in Hotel Mulia. I would just like to invite on stage the speakers before we start our talk. Let's invite on stage Her Excellency Sri Mulyani Indrawati, the Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. Next speaker is His Excellency Lawrence Wong, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Singapore. Next is the Minister of Finance from Lao PDR, His Excellency Hatipap Pomvihan. And next is the Minister of Finance from Thailand. Let's welcome His Excellency Arkom Termpitaya Paisit. And the next is His Excellency Benjamin Diokno, Secretary of the Department of Finance from Philippines. And next, let's invite on stage His Excellency Awang Haji Muhammad Amin Leo bin Abdullah, Minister of Finance and Economy of Brunei Darussalam, Deputy Minister. And last but not least, let's invite the Deputy Finance Minister of Malaysia, His Excellency Stephen Sim Chikong. So, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, the reason I have invited all speakers on stage is because I want to say that I am very honored to be sitting among very esteemed speakers that we have today, delegates from ASEAN countries, and we are very eager to hear your talks and your points on our topic today, promoting sustainable infrastructure development by enhancing collaborative effort between government and private sector. Now, the speakers today we see here, we could feel this emits a very profound sense of purpose and possibility throughout the region, which transcends borders. And I'm sure that throughout the course of days that you've been through, in the meetings that you have had in Jakarta, we are heartened by the sense of unity and the collaborative spirit showed by all ASEAN countries' representatives getting together, sharing stories, sharing lessons learned, and also strategies in finding ways to work together and harness the potential of this region. Now today, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about infrastructure. This is the bedrock of progress, the catalyst of growth, and the engine that propels nations forwards as we know it. This is a conduit of trade and mobility, a feat with empirical evidence that has a pivotal role in economic growth that not only enriches our economies, but of course it changes lives. It reduces inequality and also alleviates poverty. However, esteemed panelists, in our discourse today, we must candidly address the dissonance that exists, a gap between the positive impacts of infrastructure and the resources required to realize its potential. Now, too many nations we've seen have grappled with the echoes of underinvestment, encountering bottlenecks or even miscalculated unexpected challenges, and this has further accentuated the need to heighten investment requirements for resilient and sustainable infrastructure. We have a number which is 3.1 trillion US dollars. Let's not convert that into our money. That's going to give us a headache once we see the numbers. But 3.1 trillion USD, that is the sum of infrastructure investment needed in ASEAN. And the number is likely to grow higher due to climate change, and also if we put account additional expenditure from natural disasters. It is obvious that our public and social infrastructure is no longer sufficient to bridge this chasm. Therefore, a newer strategy is needed. This is where we look to embrace innovative financing, and this is to awaken private and institutional investors to our shared mission of a more sustainable development. Now, within the hour ahead, we are privileged to explore the potential resources of infrastructure investments, and we are eager to hear the lessons learned, success celebrated, and also challenges surmounted from our speakers. Excellencies, before we start, please allow me to start this or begin this discussion with the rapid fire round. So this is a rapid fire round for everyone here. I will inquire everyone to list 3 items that you think are urgent in producing a more sustainable infrastructure projects and allow more financing to flow to infrastructure projects in all ASEAN countries so that the gap between the financing needs and investment in the infrastructure sector can be significantly reduced. Everyone will have 2 minutes to point out the 3 items that you think are urgent. We will start with Minister Sri Mulyani, Your Excellency.
Well, 3 items which is important for infrastructure development. First, the enabling environment. This is related to the policy. If you can design the right policy, then you are going to be able to attract the right capital and realize this infrastructure. The second one is the pipeline, because we always said about the infrastructure is important, but actually designing, preparing before we even can execute the infrastructure development, that is the most important one. Many of the countries actually facing with this problem of creating and building the right pipeline of the infrastructure. You can identify that we need a clean water, road, electricity, or even telecommunication port, but usually it will require quite a lot of preparation, especially if you are taking into account the environmental aspect, the social aspect, and also the issue and the risk of governance. The third one, which is important, is actually the collaboration among the stakeholders within the ecosystem. If you look at the infrastructure, usually you don't rely mainly only for one source of financing, whether this is only public, but sometimes even within the public, you have quite a lot of differences regarding source of the public fund, whether this is direct budget or this is coming from the multilateral, bilateral, or even borrowing. So you really need to have a collaboration which is not increasing the transaction cost, but simplifying the process. And also within that context, I think the issue of procurement, which is related to a very long, sometimes inefficient one, but not necessarily guaranteeing the quality. So collaboration within the ecosystem, meaning that you really can have the coordination regarding what kind of process which is perceived as good governance, but at the same time also efficient enough so that you can execute. What we can see is, of course, these three things, that is the policy framework which is required. Second one is on a pipeline, and third, collaboration is something that need to be continue, built, and enhanced. I think my time is up.
Thank you very much, Ibu Sri Mulyani. We're moving on to Minister Lawrence Wong. Minister.
Thank you. Well, first, many thanks to Ibu Sri Mulyani and the team from MOF for having us here in Jakarta for the ASEAN Finance Ministers and also for this dialogue. My three items are as follows. Number one, we need to identify more projects. And identifying more projects is not just about saying, these are my needs, but also understanding who pays for the projects. Because projects don't come about by free, right? No, it's not going to be free of charge. Somebody must pay. And usually there are only two parties that pays. User pays or government pays. That's all. Government pays doesn't mean people don't pay, because government money also comes from taxpayers. So in fact, it's either the user of the infrastructure that pays or taxpayers pay. And if we can identify projects, design the payments for these projects, then we have a healthier pipeline of infrastructure projects, both within ASEAN countries and also across the regions, because some projects can be cross-country projects, like an ASEAN power grid or a high-speed rail across two countries. These can be between countries, but you still have to come up and identify who pays for the projects. Second, we should think about how to reduce the risk. Because even after identifying who pays, the bankers may not want to finance the project, the investors may not want to invest the projects. And that's usually because there is a gap in terms of the returns. The banks want a certain interest rate, the investors want a certain hurdle rate, but the project do not meet that basic hurdle rate, and therefore there is a financing gap. And so the second imperative is to reduce the risk of the project to make it bankable. And there are different ways in which governments can reduce the risk premium, for example, by having greater contractual or regulatory certainty, or even providing some basic guarantees in order to reduce the risk. Then the third and final, I think, wish list from me is to look at financing and how we can have more innovative financing. And that would include looking at blended financing, for example, combining concessionary financing that may be available from multilateral development banks with private banks, so that again the financing, the interest rate that's required from the financier will be lower and will make the projects more bankable. And I think if we can unlock more of such blended financing solutions, we can make many more infrastructure projects in ASEAN bankable as well.
All right, thank you very much, Minister. 3 points from Minister Pamvian. Minister Pamvian? From Lao, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, here's my 3 lists. First, attracting private sector capital, such as through public-private partnership, to boost infrastructure development without sacrificing fiscal space. Second, exploring other financing solutions, such as tapping the domestic and international capital markets. And third, improving the mainstreaming of sustainable finance. And this can be done through the adoption of a principles-based taxonomy, the establishment of a sustainable pipeline database, and the promotion of sustainable financial products. I'll stop here.
All right, thank you very much. We'll dwell further in all these points, actually, from all the ministers later on, the secretaries and deputies. Minister Tan Pitayapaisit, if you may go next.
Thank you. I think there are three items, right?
Yeah.
One is I think we need to have very good plan, good plan of the infrastructure development plan, and the feasible projects. Secondly, all the infrastructure project has to consider about the technology which go in line with the global issue. For example, right now we're talking about the climate change, so design and the feasibility of project must be looking at what kind of technology that we're going to use. And we have to have the future vision as well about technology, because sometimes when you decide the project and then the issue has changed, then you have to quickly adjust yourself, like for example, the energy transition, for example. And the third item is the financing. I'm not going to go into detail because there are lots of things to look at the financing, whether you finance by yourself, by the government budget, or you just borrow, or you just finance by your revenue yourself, or even the assistance, the collaboration with the MDBs or the bilateral basis.
Thank you very much. So, very interesting, at least so far, that we could find. There are some similarities in the answers, but I'm very much enjoying the differences, actually. This kind of shows that how much needs to be tackled when we're talking about increasing the investments, especially in tackling the investment needs of infrastructure in ASEAN. Moving on to Secretary Deputy Diokno, your answer? Oh. I went here. Oh, okay. Minister, if you may answer first, Minister.
So for me, that I think that so the infrastructure is very important. It's very the base need for the development. I think that one of the in our country, that our country is located at the heart of the ASEAN, which is connected to the different regional. So there is many things that we need to further to improve infrastructure. So investment in infrastructure, that it may the cost amount of the big amount. So the first that we follow the connectivity of the ASEAN connectivity to the region, which is very important, and that's why we already developed some program, some plan that to allocate the budget, but not only the local budget, also to find the outsource the budget as well as the private sector, private investment in different areas. This is very important. So in accompany with this, we also that issue the policy, the right policy to support the party relevance, and also provided some incentive for the other party that can be involved in terms of the financing. And secondly, that that the technology is very important also, technology, because nowadays that we could cap the latest technology in terms of the how we can to reduce and reduce some certain of some we cannot foreseen about it. This is very important for us. And the secondly that the communication like infrastructure through the digitalization to facilitate some smooth movement of the trade and service to provide environment and smart and city for in the future. So this is a thing that we for an ASEAN and for our country also that we some of the change the comment of view to this meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jokno. Challenges are changing as well, so a very interesting point there, and we'll address that as well. Moving on to Brunei Darussalam, Excellency Muhammad Amin Liu.
Yeah, thank you. I think as finance ministers, I think we are all faced with the common challenge of finding enough funding for all the projects that we are wanting to do. So we need to rely on private capital. But I think to make investment projects sustainable, I think in my view, I think it has to, down to a proper execution of the project and also the project post-completion operation of the projects. So whatever investment project that we identify, we must make sure that there is right skill sets to execute the projects and the ability to understand the risk and reward of the project and the ability to attract private capital. So I think the three items that I would like to share would be to encourage more PPP for many of these projects. And secondly, the adoption of technology. And the last, if you look at many of the projects that we may be looking going forward, it requires the ASEAN countries to come in together. I think Lawrence mentioned about this ASEAN grid, for example. How could we actually make use of everybody's renewable energy and create a grid among the ASEAN countries? And so this would require all of us to come together and work on this project. And therefore, harmonization of standards will be important so that when private capital were to come in, it would not have to deal with all the different standards across all the different countries, but we are under one single standard. So these are the 3 points I thought I would share. Thank you.
So the base could be an ASEAN, in this ASEAN grid, we will have an ASEAN standard, ASEAN base, and therefore it would easily move among ASEAN countries altogether.
Yeah, some projects maybe individual countries will do on their own, but there are other projects, I think we will see more and more of that we probably have to come in together and do it together. So the harmonization of standards, I think, is one important aspect that we should consider.
Okay, I can only imagine the possibilities when we get there, so that would be very interesting. Moving on, Excellency Stevenson.
The problem with 3 point, when you reach the 7 guy,
you're at point 33 right now.
point mentioned. But perhaps I think maybe we can start with the beginning. You know, my first point would be, the ASEAN member states have to recognize and capitalize on our natural advantage. The Chinese has a very interesting way to summarize Sun Tzu Bingfa, the art of war. They said in 6 characters, 天时地利人和, meaning the climate, the terrain, and the human factor. I think we have this in terms of vis-a-vis sustainable development here in ASEAN. We have got the climate, we have sun and wind all year long. We've got a very rich diversity, biodiversity, and then we have got a society deeply connected to the earth because of our historical agrarian and seafaring history. So I think this is something that we have to recognize and capitalize on. I'll just give you a simple example, a recent example in Malaysia. Because of our culture, because of our climate, just a few days ago, the government announced that civil servants now can wear batik every day of the week. Previously, only on Thursday. So every day of the week. And then at the same time, we tie into climate change. You have to increase the air condition to 24 to 25 degrees Celsius. That's one. Second point would be, I think, the elephant in the room. At times, we have to recognize that there are fierce competition between member states, especially in terms of high-tech development, high-tech investment, sustainable green energy investment. I think in this area, it need not be zero-sum, in the sense that perhaps, I like to think about the Airbus model, where the European governments came together to facilitate a European aircraft industry way back in the 70s. So I think in this aspect, we can tighten our collaboration within ASEAN member states so that the fierce competition need not be zero-sum. Finally, I agree with my colleagues about the ensuring the sustainability of sustainable development in terms of financing. And in that sense, I think we should expand PPP so that we can capitalize on private capitals, especially SMEs across the ASEAN member states, facilitate greater investment intra-ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Let's give a first round of applause to our speakers. Thank you for joining that rapid fire question session. Now, very interesting. We're talking about collaborations, and that's a word that we've been going on and on in many meetings before this one as well. But there are many forums, as our speakers have mentioned, that we have to realize the competition as well. But that's not about that's not a zero-sum game. That competition should be a healthy competition and should actually give more room to collaboration as well from the same industries and governments with the same interests in sustainable infrastructure. Now, I have questions for all the speakers here. My first question is for Ibu Sri Mulyani. We'd like to know the strategy and the role of the Indonesian government to narrow the infrastructure gap that is here in Indonesia, and also probably if you would like to go further in ASEAN as well, what your thoughts on that, Ibu Sri Mulyani?
Thank you, Tim. You mentioned earlier on the opening that the need for the ASEAN is around $3 trillion US dollar. That's really a big money for 2016 to 2030. That's maybe around 200 billion per year. For many of us, especially Indonesia as a big country, the infrastructure gap have the implication in terms of our competitiveness and productivity. So yes, when we identify there is an infrastructure gap, we have to address. The problem is resources, as Lawrence mentioned. There are a lot of resources, but they have a different appetite in terms of risk and the expected return. So for the infrastructure to be gap to be addressed, then you have to discuss regarding what is the risk appetite, and each of these financing sources, maybe they also have their own governance and the rate of return that they are expecting. Now, for Indonesia, of course, when we are talking about infrastructure gap, when the government have their own budget, we allocate infrastructure in terms of our spending, as well as below the line, that means investment. That will not adequate, definitely. So we need to attract more capital. And that means, and when I said government, it's not only central government, but also local government. local government in Indonesia, maybe as not as Lawrence, which is one country, one city. We have a huge lot of local government, so we have the capacity, which is different. You also have different fiscal space for the local government. So this will require also another intervention of what kind of policy that can support the local government participation. The second one, when we are talking about the pipeline as well as the private sector participation, we built this pipeline including preparing for the structure on the financing. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to build this kind of railways or railroad, or we are going talking about the toll road, but we are talking also about who will be financing this, and that's really depend on how attractive this infrastructure. So when we deal the private sector, then the appetite of risk is going to be different. First, they love to participate, but certainly they are expecting return. Risk is the biggest hurdle, as others also talking about. So usually the government will intervene not in terms of the spending, but how we can provide project pipeline development. So we have PDF in Indonesia, Project Development Facility. You also can guarantee some of the risks so that this project is going to attract private sector. The risk can be in the form of political risk, can be natural disaster risk, can be in the form of policy risk. Because when dealing with whether this is electricity or talking about toll road, is the government willing to adjust the tariff so that they are going to generate revenue, or even water? So this is related to the policy-related risk. The third one is, of course, when I'm talking about the ecosystem, for the Indonesia, we really have to come up with some instrument that need to be developed. So whether this is financing, private sector will only participate, but we want to just lending to the government. So this is like the debt instrument. So we issue like green bond, sukuk. These are all the instruments in which the participation of the private sector in the form of lending. So we borrow from them. But if the private sector would like to have a higher appetite that is equity financing, they may also have expectation of higher return. And within this equity financing, then you are dealing with this kind of risk framework that need to be addressed. And that's why the instrument regarding guarantee risk management is going to be come into picture. For Indonesia, we also establishing special mission vehicle. So we have PTSMI, we have also the IIF, we also have the guarantee, PTPII. We also have Indonesia Infrastructure, Indonesia Sovereign Wealth Fund. These are all actually created in order for us to be able to provide direct engagement with the private sector with a different appetite and different sophistication. So these are all the Indonesia experience in dealing with this infrastructure gap. We continue improving the policy. We created instrument from the borrowing up to the equity financing. We address the issue of the risk, and we also preparing for the local government the ability for them to be able to develop the pipeline as well as executing the project. These are all many of the government of Indonesia trying to build what you call it public-private partnership in a more sustainable and transparent way.
Just a follow-up, Ibu Sri Mulyani, to increase it further in the equity financing, can you do that through regulations? Because it's not really in the government's control for that. Again, it's the appetite of the investor.
Well, it is also the appetite of the investors to be partnered with the government or even investing by themselves. In the electricity or power sector, they actually much more straightforward. They can become the builder of the power generation and then they contracting. So they put all their equity on the power production and then they contracting the off-taker to the government. Or in a toll road, they can co-finance or they are bidding for a chunk of road, which is then they build using their own money and they have the ownership of this road and then they will expect generation. On the water sector, they actually can partnering with the local government water company. So these are all, it is not a problem of regulation. It is more the appetite and how complex and the ability for them to actually invest and compete in this kind of infrastructure development. Usually, unintentionally also, the role of the state-owned enterprise can become also a facilitator or catalytic or become an obstacle for the private sector to participate. So these are all need to be addressed depending on what sector and what project that we are talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Mulyani. I have a question for Mr. Lawrence Wong. We'd like to know what actions have been taken by the government of Singapore to facilitate sustainable infrastructure.
Our approach really is to look at how we can advance infrastructure, both green as well as traditional infrastructure, not just for Singapore, but for the entire Southeast Asian region. Because when you look ahead at a world that is full of geopolitical tensions and where competition is becoming more intense, the reality is that the competition we face is not within ASEAN, but is outside of ASEAN. You will have economies like US, China, even India now coming up, EU. These are large economies, all competing for influence, competing for investments. And no single ASEAN country can compete on our own. But ASEAN combined, if we are stronger and more united, then we stand a chance of competing against these big countries and navigating our way forward in a very uncertain and turbulent world. And the way to unlock ASEAN's potential is through infrastructure. And that's why from Singapore's point of view, helping ASEAN unlock more infrastructure is win-win. It's not a competition, it's a plus for Singapore, it's a plus for all of ASEAN. How can we do that? We will try various ways. We have set up an Infrastructure Asia office in Singapore, really to help with project facilitation. So we offer project advisory and structuring solutions, and we connect countries or governments with partners. The partners would include solutions providers that are based in Singapore, or MDBs that are based in Singapore. The ADB and the World Bank has an office in Singapore, or even with financial institutions that can provide financing solutions. So that's one way in which we can help. Another way in which we are looking to see how we can play a role is to advance and promote more blended finance, especially in the area of green and transition financing. So blended finance, as I highlighted just now, is where we combine concessionary capital and then we catalyze and bring in private capital to blend together so that you lower the rate of financing and you make more projects bankable. So we are now discussing with partners to see if we can bring together more concessionary capital, not just from governments, but also from multilateral development banks and even philanthropists, philanthropic organizations. If we can pool together more concessionary capital, then potentially we can draw in more private financing and we can bring to the table a lot more financing for green and transition projects all over Southeast Asia.
So in general, actually, but green projects, of course, are welcome as well. And it's interesting to see, will there be like incentives, or what could we see if for investors coming to invest through Singapore or in Singapore in the infrastructure investment, when they come, when they especially look for green investments, will there be incentives for them? Will there be a different kind of blended investment or risk management?
I think investors are already interested in looking at green and sustainable projects. The key is you need a project that will meet their rate of return. They have, all investors will have a certain expected return in order to meet. They have a hurdle rate. So we take that as a given. But the project itself may not meet the expectations of the investors. So how can we bridge that gap? And the only way to, or one way to bridge that gap is to have concessionary capital. So whether from governments, whether from philanthropists, or from MDBs, where the concessionary capital is either free, zero return, it's a grant, or potentially it has a much lower rate of return. Then when you bring together private capital and concessionary capital, we will be able to reduce the rate of return and we can make projects bankable. And the way to do this in a more impactful manner is not just to do it project by project, but to bring it together into a platform that can scale. So for example, rather than say MDB, World Bank or ADB has concessionary capital and we provide funding for project A, project B, one project at a time, I think that doesn't scale. But if we could bring together 500 million of concessionary capital or even $1 billion of concessionary capital, then we can use that to draw in private capital, and altogether we might be able to multiply the project financing to $5 billion. Then you really are talking about maximizing the value of the concessionary capital, maximizing project financing, and enabling many, many more projects across the region to be funded.
So this is one form of innovative financing that we've been mentioning from the beginning. Moving on to the Minister from Laos, Minister Pompian. Minister, which subsectors of infrastructure, according to the Lao PDR, are still constrained so that MDBs, private sector, and others can invest? Minister Pompian. So.
The most still the constraint that for our country that in terms of infrastructure that the mostly that when we affecting some climate change and the and the pandemic so on, that it is very constrained on how we can the first one is about the how we can they get financing. This is very important because the finance is very important for us that we can very that we need to more cooperation with different agencies, different parties, and the state investment. This is it. And the secondly, that we constrain about the quality in terms of the quality of how we can give the infrastructure in the good quality, but we still needed some technical, some who can be comply with the international standard that we can to come up or to meet this one. So there's that need further more cooperation with the different or MDBs, something like this, and also work with other like ministries bodies in the country, in the other ASEAN country, and also in the region. That could be help to overcome the other that face or constraint, something like this. This is some and this we can share that from this meeting or this discussion with
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to apologize. I keep on looking for you, but it's such a big panel. I keep imagining Minister Pombihan is there, and you're right in front of me. I'm very sorry for that. Very interesting to see that international standard. And we talked about the ASEAN standard and creating that ASEAN standard. Should that meet an international standard as well to make ASEAN the region easier to approach more larger, wider investor base?
Yeah, we think that in ASEAN and in ASEAN that when we are in a globalization era, in a globalization era, so we how we can approach to the regional from different just among the ASEAN country, but also they are apart from the ASEAN also. This is we need some cooperation between an ASEAN the country that to how to say to
The standard or
the
cooperation between the ASEAN
between
countries?
ASEAN and then to meet the standard.
Okay.
For the
To upgrade
upgrade
the standard of between ASEAN countries as well.
Yeah, and also that something in this.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Moving on to Thailand, Minister Tarampitai Paisit. What are the policies that we would like to know? The policies and the programs from the government of Thailand to attract MDBs, the private sector, and also others to invest in the infrastructure sector in Thailand.
Well, actually, as I said at the beginning, we need to have the very good planning for infrastructure, facing priority, and then we look at the when we are working with the MDBs, what the MDB interest, and whether the project has go in line with the global issue, or maybe some of the project maybe it's projects that self-interest, not attractive for the foreign investor or even the MDB.
This is the same point with Minister Lawrence, that it has to, meet their appetite as well.
That's right. That's right. And then, and MDB, I'm talking about the MDB as a financial institution, international financial institution, as well as the advanced country who have been working with our country. Non-financial institution, basically they're interested in the technology. They want to sell the technology. They want to help the project design. This is what we welcome actually in Thailand. Actually, right now, for example, all the projects we are talking to the financial institution, but whether the project itself is feasible or what kind of technology we consult with the other MDB, not the non-financial country as a bilateral. So we welcome all the technical assistance from the many countries. So that's why when we formulate the project, we formulate in the good quality of the project, whether we cover the global issue or not. I would raise the example when we're talking about the one of the projects that we're working with the ADB is the Medical Excellence Center. If you talk to medical doctor or Ministry of Public Health, they're talking about the building and putting the equipment. But when we talk to ADB recommendation is that we have to look at the climate, whether the building can save the energy. So design of the project has changed, putting some some elements into the project that make it more attractive for the investor. It may not be financed by the ADB. It may be the bilateral financing between the two countries, right? So this is what we've been doing. And secondly, when we're talking about the environment, we're talking about climate and environment. Some of the projects, maybe we overlook some of the issue of the environmental issue or conservation. we have the one projects on the building the bridge crossing the lake. In the lake, there are about 14 dolphins, which is very, very, very rare. And then, in terms of the environment impact assessment, it cannot be approved. But when looking at the international standard, or global standard, then in the project you have to take into account of the conservatory of the dolphin. So we turn this project from the negative impact to the environment to positive by raising the dolphin, more dolphin in the lake, and turning the lake into the more tourist attraction. So this kind of the turning the risk of the environment impact to the opportunity for the project. This is one of the example. The success example that in Thailand, when we construct the highway, passing through the 2 national parks, absolutely the environment committee, they will not approve. So we have to redesign with the consultant, with the advice from the international agency. So making the tunnel, artificial tunnel. So making these 2 parks can be connected without interruption of the highway. So then the wildlife, I mean elephant, tiger, they can cross between these two national parks. So this kind of thing that I think the technical assistance and the helping the shape up the project design. Okay. Financing, I think we can do many. We absolutely we can manage. Whether we finance by our own budget. As I said, some of the donors they are not interested in the some of the project, but some of the project they interested. It's really depend on their interests as well. So financing can be from the budget. If the project cost is very high and no investor would like to invest in the project. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Moving on, I'll go to Mr. Diokno. We're talking about policymakers. What are the what would policymakers of the government of Philippines and possibly ASEAN member states, what should they focus on to support a more sustainable infrastructure financing program?
Okay, thank you for that question. The Philippines may be considered as lagging behind our ASEAN neighbors in terms of infrastructure, and I can see why. Because of our political system. Our political system is that we have a fixed term of office. The president has only 6 years, no re-election. Okay, so he has to do everything within that period. And so the focus of previous presidents was on short-term projects, not big projects, because you want to show something before you leave the scene, right? So when I served President Duterte, the previous president, when we came in, there was no ready to implement long-term projects. Okay, no ready. So we have to rely heavily on official development assistance, World Bank, ADB, our partners, bilateral partners, China, Japan, South Korea. There was no ready to implement projects. And for the last 50 years, I look at the last 50 years, our infrastructure as a percent of GDP was only 2%. And I said, this is not sustainable. So that gave birth to what I call the golden age of infrastructure, starting with President Duterte. And so we, on an annual basis, we allocate around 5 to 6% of our budget for 5 to 6% of GDP for our infrastructure projects. And this is continued by the current president. All right? So now we have large projects, and this administration is lucky because President Duterte prepared some 197 large projects, priority projects. And so we can implement those now. Some of the projects started by President Duterte, like a subway, that will be finished by the end of this president's term. So it really matters whether the kind of system that you have. And the Philippines also is, like Indonesia, we have 7,200 islands, okay? So we have to interconnect some of the provinces to link the lagging regions to the center, and so we need a lot of those projects. And out of the 197 priority projects, around 98 of the 197 are ongoing projects right now. So, so that is very important, that by the time you start your administration, you already have ready to implement projects, and you're willing to implement projects prepared by the previous administration. Because sometimes, with the change in administration, you stop and say, I want to have my own projects. That doesn't work like that. So, so that takes care of the infrastructure projects. We have 197, as I said, and worth $155 billion, okay, worth. And I see around half of that to be funded by official development assistance, and about 10% through the budget, and around 30% through public-private partnership. We have to tap the public-private partnership. We changed the rules of the game, so now public-private partnership is very attractive, and we have successfully approved already a lot of projects, including the rehabilitation of our main airport, okay, and several airports. And in the meantime, during the pandemic, we didn't sit idly by and wait for the virus to subside. Okay? We reformed our economy, and we opened our economy. We passed laws that would allow 100% ownership of many sectors: telco, airports, toll roads, shipping. Because I understand that in many countries, emerging economies, telco, power, water are public sector domain. In the Philippines, all these are private sector. Telco, power, water are private sector. And we also opened up renewable energy, 100% ownership. If you want to invest in the Philippines, you can own solar, wind, tidal, geothermal. You can invest 100% ownership. So we have to change the rules of the game to attract more investment. And in addition, I think we floated something like 3.6 billion worth of green bonds. And these are now for the private sector who would like to invest in some green projects. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Interesting. With all the limitations, a more rapid movement is needed as well. You just need to change the gameplay. So moving on, I hope we still have much more time for the second round. Moving on to Excellency Muhammad Aminul. What types of success stories about sustainable infrastructure investment that Brunei wants to see more, and what led to that success?
Thank you. I think over the last couple of years, I think we have done quite a few projects to enhance our infrastructure. One of them is actually on our seaport. For many years, we have been trying to improve the efficiency of our seaport, and also the expansion of the infrastructure, the berth and so on. So for many years, I think we are not quite successful in doing so. So as I mentioned earlier on, one of the important factors to do this successfully is to adopt the right PPP approach with the right structure and so on. And so I think a couple of years ago, I think we managed to form this partnership with someone who has the ability, the right skill sets to do it, and as well as the connection around this region to be able to improve the efficiency of the seaport. And so ever since this was done about 6-7 years ago, I think we have seen major improvement in this in the seaport, in our infrastructure. The other one I would like to share is is adoption of technology. I think I mentioned that earlier on as well. So if everybody remember, during COVID, we have this contact tracing applications and so on. And so what we have done is in anticipation of the next pandemic. So this is the healthcare infrastructure that we have to plan going forward. So how do we plan better in such a way that the health ministries will not keep coming to the finance ministry for more money and more money every time? So how do we make sure that we have a bit more sort of a precision in our anticipation of the kind of facility and infrastructure that we need to put in? So I think the adoption of technology, AI, and that sort of thing will be very important, so that we can have a bit more sort of certainties in terms of how many beds we need to equip, how many doctors and nurses that we need to hire, and what sort of equipment that we need to bring in. So without that sort of this sort of forecasting or prediction, it's very difficult for finance ministries to come up with the right budget. It's not about just overspending, but we are also worried about underspending. So in anticipation of the next pandemic, how do we be more certain about getting our infrastructure ready and making sure that it's sufficient and not wasting our fund too? So I think on that we have developed quite a sophisticated system in place, and we continue to develop that. And once we get there, I think it will actually save the government a lot of money. Even today, patients can do online consultation, make their own appointment. If they go overseas, if they fall ill, they can open up their own medical record when they see a doctor overseas country. So all these are all facilities that we continue to build on, develop on from our so-called contact tracing application, because otherwise I can see many countries are actually abandoning, whatever that was invested in the contact tracing, they just threw it away. But we continue to develop that. I think these are some of the success stories that I thought I'd just share.
Thank you. COVID did really open our eyes, and being finance ministers during the COVID era, even Ibu Sri Mulyani also smiled when we wanted a more better budget planning for health. Of course, that would help us a lot in the future, and we don't know what challenges we will face in the future. Moving on to Excellency Stephen Sim, what would you say, how can international organizations, MDBs, and private sectors, and also other investors support more sustainable infrastructure investment in Malaysia?
Thank you. The early years of independence, perhaps the first 2 decades of our independence, a lot of focus was on developing rural economy. And it was at that time where Malaysia was highly dependent on external financing. For example, we had assistance from IBRD to build our national infrastructure, the hydroelectric, irrigation system, water supply system, etc. So it was the first 2 decades of our country. By the time we moved into the industrialized 80s and 90s, Malaysia has developed quite a robust local capital market, and almost 90% of our infrastructure development are funded locally. Today, the bond market size in Malaysia is about 2 trillion ringgit. So, as we move into the 21st century, I think in terms of external organizations and external assistance, Malaysia would appreciate, as we are embarking on a cleaner and greener economy, high-tech economy, we will appreciate perhaps assistance in terms of technological transfer, technical advisory, PPP. Perhaps one example would be, again, a recent example. The government just recently launched the National Energy Transition Roadmap, NETR, with an investment opportunity of up to 1.85 trillion ringgit. So there are 10 catalytic projects within this NETR. I think we will appreciate when it comes to investment in terms of technological transfer, in terms of advisory, in terms of perhaps even PPP in this aspect.
All right, interesting. Now, we still have time for a second round. Probably we won't have that much time to answer, so probably we have 3 minutes for each speaker to answer the next round of questions. Just going straight, moving on to Ibu Sri Mulyani, Indonesia has been very much focusing under Pak Jokowi on infrastructure. Now, if you would share with us the success story that you think needs to be highlighted in Indonesia, and what led to that success?
Well, the emphasis of President Jokowi to catch up with this infrastructure gap as a very important consequence in terms of pushing many of the effort by the ministries and local government, and also inviting private sector. I think the first success story is when the government announcing there is a priority of the project, we call it a strategic national priority, then it will move. This is what you call it, mobilizing all the forces, especially at the central government level, because it will require a lot of collaboration, as I mentioned on my first intervention. So whether this is related to the land use or land purchase, and then what is the commitment of the capital spending, what kind of structure that we need to build in order for us to invite more private sector, and then what kind of fiscal tools which is fit with this one. This actually fit with many of the project toll road in Java in this case, which is relatively mature, and that's why we can attract more and easier private sector. In Sumatra maybe less, because it is still on the traffic and the challenge of physical on the road construction, which is different from Java Island. Water sector in this case is also another success story, but also suffering a certain setback because it requires local government participation, and especially related to the local water companies. This is have something to do with also the tariff of the water, which will attract more private sector or not. We have some of the airport is actually quite success story, especially on the big city, because the traffic is actually quite mature. And that's why the airport is becoming very busy, and the airport management or expansion of the airport becoming very attractive on actually attracting private sector. So it's not relying mostly from the public funding. Some seaport is still, especially for the industrial zone, Indonesia and Singapore opening the Batang industrial zone, that will require a lot of infrastructure from the power sector and then dedicated port. These are all also require quite a lot. So a lot of quite a very diverse infrastructure project. Indonesia is also building for the new capital in Kalimantan, in which many will require the first public fund in order for us to build the necessary infrastructure before we can attract private sector, and this is related to the road. But when we are discussing, for example, on the airport and the water, electricity, this will attract more. And housing is another thing that also can attract private sector. So you can see it's like Indonesia is such a huge geographic differences. Each region have their own attractiveness. For Java Island, usually is much more mature because population density, purchasing power is relatively mature. So you actually can have a much better attraction for the private sector. For many island, big but less populated, big island but less populated, then you have a totally different challenge on the infrastructure development. And in that case, the public sector or public funding is even more required. Papua definitely is a different game. So all of the project, especially on the road, that's public funding. Airport is also public funding. That is for the region, which is also require quite a lot of intervention. Local government is another thing that is need to be empowered and equipped capacity, as well as on financing and risk management. So these are all maybe some of what we call it the progress or achievement, but we also can identify through this progress still a lack of or continuous support both in terms of policy, instrument, financing scheme, as well as risk management.
Actually, if we had time, I'd like to go further into the new capital. That would be a very interesting investment point there for Indonesia. But I'll have to move on to Singapore. Minister Lawrence, we're talking back about policymakers. What would you say should be the focus for policymakers to support a sustainable infrastructure financing program?
I think often when we talk about financing of infrastructure, governments everywhere tend to focus on the financing solutions as a priority. And I can understand why, because that's where the gap is the greatest. But my sort of, or Singapore's experience has been, the starting point is not financing. Because sometimes when you start with financing and you're stuck with the person providing the financing, the person providing the financing may also impose conditions on governments. You must use certain solutions. You must use certain contractors. And it may not always be the best for the country. So our starting point is not start with financing, but start with project structure, project solution. Think about what is the payment structure of the project. And very often, as Benjamin said just now, these are long-term projects. They cannot be, infrastructure project will last 30, 40 years. It goes through many terms of government. So have clarity around how the project is to be structured, who is to pay, what is the payment stream, what is the regulatory framework. These are all important design considerations that has to be planned from the outset and preferably locked in, so that even if there is a change of government down the road, the project parameters will not change. And if we have that, then you can call a tender, you can find the best solutions, you can get the project financed. That has been how we go about doing projects in Singapore. We have found that to be a better method. And over time, when you build up a track record, one project gets funded, second project gets funded, then over time, with a solid track record, investors feel assured, bankers feel assured, risk premiums come down, then governments will find it easier to get their projects financed, and you don't even need to rely on banks or financial institutions to finance the projects. You can raise bonds in the markets, you can get infrastructure bonds, green bonds, and with a good track record, with reduced risk premiums, you create a virtuous circle, and progressively, financing gets easier and easier. So don't start with financing as the solution. Start with project structure, project design as the first priority, and along the way, if you have good design, good solution, financing will get better and better over time.
You might just have shared the golden secret to Singapore's very strong financial market there. Thank you so much. Moving on to Minister Pomvihan, if you would go about the policies and programs that the Lao PDR government has done to attract the international organizations and private sector to invest in the infrastructure sector.
Yeah. So I think there might be some different from other ASEAN country because I think that in terms of the level or stage of development seen different if compared to other country. Like I heard that Singaporean mentioned so different than from other country. Yeah, this is, I think that this is a very useful or a good lesson for us also. But for Lao, that we at first that we should have some priority of the project for the infrastructure. So in our country that we have in the 5 years plan that we have some certain priority project that we have been in place, but mostly that we think that we should consider about the policy. That policy can be supported support today that project for the investment for the private sector and for other the organization can be provided. And right now that we, before that, we just rely on the organization, like international organization, to support some finance. But right now we try to a different modality or method can be. We open more, encourage more other term of the investment like PPP and BOT and something else which we currently that we encourage that the policy would, they will have some degrees and some law that to support for the PPP and for the BOT something like this. And so far that that's a very the first that very important that we should have priorities project and could be accommodated to which part that could be financed or source finance from other maybe from private or maybe from organization institution something. This is we have been that so far that in our country, but we focus also on the green green infrastructure like which is giving the environment friendly that also that attract to the investment for this project also. That's that in our case in our country that we have so far that I can share that with this discussion.
So more accommodating, that's the direction for Laos.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Minister. Moving on to Thailand, Excellency Tan Pitai Paisit, which subsectors of infrastructure, according to Thailand, is still constrained so that MDBs, private sectors, and others can also invest in Thailand?
I think right now we are talking about the only two major infrastructure. First, transportation, and secondly, on the power sector, electricity. So in Thailand, these two sectors consume about 85%. 85% of investment goes to these two sectors.
Infrastructure investment goes there.
To the transportation and the energy, particularly electricity. What we have to discuss, we discuss in our government as well, because right now we're looking at the future technology. Digital infrastructure is one of them. Okay, but right now we haven't invested a lot, but mostly given to the private sector. So digital infrastructure for unprofitable area, for example, the remote area or last mile area is not profitable for the private sector. So that's maybe one of the sector that we are looking at. Secondly, this morning we're talking about the public health, the health infrastructure. Of course, in Thailand, health sector rely on the national budget. But if you want to go further, to be more commercialized, then you need more technology, more high technology in the medical sector. So that's one. That's the second one that coping with the pandemic. We learned from that. Although we have very good hospital in Thailand, but still we need more in the region, in the rural area. Third is we haven't since the 2011, Thailand faced a big flooding in many areas of the country. So water resources is one of them. that consume quite big investment cost. And the last one, I think quite few people talking about is the science technology infrastructure. So right now we're working with the Japanese government on the synchrotron. Synchrotron is one of the technology that can enhance your product quality in the whatever products and materials. So right now we put our focus more on the science technology. 4 areas: digital infrastructure, public health, and the science technology and water resources sector. But again, I think we, as Lawrence just mentioned, that about the project design. I think the collaboration must be between the project owner and the financier. We don't just receive the project proposal and we signing the cashier check or whatever. But you need to discuss from the beginning whether the project is feasible, this project is sexy or not.
So you have to collaborate earlier.
So that's why we need the technical assistance from the MDB or financial institution. Once that you decide in the beginning, you decide correctly, and then I think I'm sure that the private sector will be interested in the investing in this. And thirdly, the PPP. I think many countries facing about the debt ceiling. Of course, the financing from the budget, many countries facing the deficit budget. But deficit budget is create the public debt in your account, in your finance account. But how we release, how we cash up all the projects, PPP is one of them. In Thailand, actually right now the 60% is the borrowing to finance the infrastructure. Of course, the state-owned enterprise, they have their own revenue. They can charge from the people. But only 18% let's go to PPP. And now more and more, particularly on the transportation in the mass transit system in Thailand. So we will do more on the PPP.
So that's a focus there in Thailand. This is the area that we need to know. Moving on from Thailand, we are moving on to Excellency Benjamin Diok now. Excellency, how can international organizations, MDBs in private sector and others support more sustainable infrastructure investments, especially in the Philippines?
They've been very helpful in the design of sustainability framework. And so we use them, except that I think the ASEAN as a group should have their own taxonomy on what is green, so we can move forward, have a standard, things like that. Now let me answer the previous question. What are the priority areas? Where are we lacking? I think number 1 is power. Okay. If you ask investors in the Philippines, why are you not coming? They said, we have one of the highest power costs. And it's not because of lack of power generation. It's our inefficient grid. We have surplus areas that cannot reach the deficit area. So the grid system, we need to fix that. Second is water. Water is important because of its health implications. Okay, and we have a lot of water during rainy season, but none during the dry season. So we have to invest in catchment areas, I think. And number 3, because of digitalization, I think we have to improve the connectivity of our 7,200 islands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, very straightforward. Moving on, I think we still have time available. I'm going straight to Excellency Muhammad Amin Liu. We'd like to know the strategy and role of the government of Brunei to narrow the infrastructure gap. The question came to Ibu Sri Mulyani previously. What do you do to narrow this gap?
I think in the case of Brunei, it's not so much about infrastructure gap. I think it's to look into our existing infrastructure and how to make them more efficient. I think just to touch on what Ben was saying earlier on, power, water, telecommunication are some of these basic infrastructure. And so, like what Lawrence also mentioned earlier on, we have been conducting our own study and not just going to financial and say, to ask them to fund some of this upgrading and so on. First is to understand what do we need. How would this project be viable? Would it be attractive to the investor if we were to, before we go out to the financier? And then if it is too risky, how would the government de-risk the project to make it attractive for the investors to come in? And so we have done all this, we have done all our internal study. And then you go out and seek for interested party to come in, based on whatever we think would be viable. One of the, but not all the projects are investable. There are some social and development projects and so on. So probably government would then have to step in a bit differently from the others. So one of the area that we have done is on the telecommunication. We have recently upgraded our telecommunication system without government spending any money at all. So in return, we are able to improve our telecommunication. And today in Brunei, the mobile speed that we experience in Brunei is ranked number 5 globally. So, and from a very, we were ranked quite low, but today we are number 5 without spending any money from the government. And the broadband has also equally improved. So I think this is one good example of what we have done on infrastructure. And how do we continue to improve the power, the water, and so on? Again, we are adopting this model like what Lawrence was saying. If you have a good design of your project, naturally, the ability to raise financing will come. But if you don't design it properly, again, if you start thinking about financing without giving the investor the comfort of the viability of this project, then you're starting on the wrong place.
Just a short follow-up, where do we usually miss to see that in providing a good pitch, a good design for that product?
Well, I think so I think what you need to establish first is what do you want to see the project to turn out to be, right? And then look at what other countries are doing, and see what lessons that you can learn from that. But in the case of our telecommunication, in fact, Brunei started this model first, because we used to have many networks invested by different operators. So we amalgamate all this network into one single network and make sure that it's a good and reliable network. And you reduce the spending, pass on the saving to the subscribers. And today, as I said, the mobile subscribers enjoying top 5 globally speed, but the subscribers rates has come down 3 times since that. So you're paying much cheaper for a better quality. And so that's how we as part of the all this effort to promote digitalization, Internet of Things, and so on. And this is one way we felt that we have done it differently.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Now, moving to Mr. Stephen Sim, you've shared about what areas that we could still tap into for investment. How about a success story? Just to give a picture of what Malaysia can provide, what can we see for the future of Malaysia when it comes to sustainable infrastructure investments?
Perhaps building from what Pak Amin has shared, digitalization, because this is something that Malaysia aspire to embark on. So there is this project which was started in 2019, and again this is also an example of continuity despite the different regime, change of government in Malaysia. The project started in 2019 with about 21 billion ringgit in terms of investment for developing connectivity throughout the country. And when we began that project, we are looking at about 80% 4G connectivity, and then certain area there are disparity. For example, the Borneo state of Sabah, Sarawak, or even Kelantan in Peninsular Malaysia, we are looking at below 80% coverage. So when this project was started in 2019, and then when there's a change of government, it was expanded. It was rebranded and expanded into what we have today as Jendela. Jendela basically means a window, but it is an acronym for Jaringan Digital Negara, the National Digital Network. Jendela was expanded to 28 billion ringgit in the first phase. And today, with the new government, we have also continued that project. And by the end of 2023, we have actually met the target of connectivity. For example, you're looking at 97% in terms of 4G coverage all over the country, and over 40%, almost 50% 5G coverage in terms of population. So that is one. And one of the strengths of this project is the PPP partnership. We are looking at 60% being funded by the private sector, and then 40% funded by the government. And perhaps another example would be the concept of wakaf or Islamic endowment in Malaysia. Traditionally, wakaf is perceived as physical assets such as land, buildings, or perhaps even gold being endowed for religious purposes in the Islamic religion. But more and more today in Malaysia, Islamic scholar has defined wakaf to be larger. You can use it beyond religious purposes, and it will also include money and cash. So just one example, Wakaf Penang, which is a state government-linked company about 5 years old. Today, despite being a very young company, they are embarking on a PPP development project on Wakaf land with a GDV of over 1 billion ringgit, just in the state of Penang alone. And building affordable housing as well as commercial units. And you can imagine the potential. We are looking at 30 hectares of Wakaf land in Malaysia, and only about 10% of it has been developed. So I think this is one way of exploring an alternative financing model, especially within the Islamic world.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen. I would just like to have 1 minute from each speaker, just as a closing statement as we approach the end of today's session. We would be focusing on what should be the takeaways when we're talking about how we could increase the public-private partnership here in focusing on infrastructure investment. What should be the takeaways, especially as we meet here in Jakarta, ASEAN members here, also business parties and so on. What should be the takeaway as we leave Jakarta? What should we know about the potential, about what's next for each countries and for the region? Ibu Sri Mulyani, if you may begin.
I should be the last one because the host.
Oh, sure.
It's okay. So can I?
Would you want to go
Lawrence
last? It's okay. I'll let the guests go first. Ibu Sri Mulyani, apologies for that. So I guess we'll go to Mr. Lawrence Wong.
Sure. Well, I would say infrastructure is key to unlocking ASEAN's potential. And increasingly, when we talk about infrastructure, it's not just the traditional areas of transport, utilities, but we have new areas like digital, and even more so now, green and transition infrastructure becomes more and more important. So to unlock all of this infrastructure, we need partnerships, we need good planning, we need good design, and we need to all work together in ASEAN to create more of such projects, not just within our own individual countries, but across the whole of ASEAN, so that we can truly unlock ASEAN's potential in this world.
Thank you very much. Next, Minister Pomfian.
Yes, so I think that we can learn from these penalties, and we hope that we can build the ASEAN that are stronger in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the connectivity, and we should we should cooperate. We see the same goal, the same target, see the same future. So we need to more cooperation and collaboration closely, and together we can move the ASEAN to the in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Minister Tan Pitai Paisi.
Thank you. I think since the 2015 we have been witnessing the progress of the ASEAN Master Plan on connectivity. I think we spent quite a lot of resources on the physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So now we can be able to travel around the ASEAN country, particularly for the land border area that all connected. But we need to think about how we resolve our difference in the software, in the rules and regulation. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think our Ministry of Finance, I believe not all, but most of us are facing the resource constraints, particularly the budget. So we need to carefully select the infrastructure, at least two criteria. One is to build the competitiveness of the industry to make a further growth. Secondly, taking care of the vulnerable groups. The infrastructure, we cannot build a very modern, but we're leaving the people behind. So I think we have to be carefully select the digital infrastructure, two types of infrastructure for the future.
Thank you very much, Minister. Moving on to Mr. Benjamin Diokno, Excellency.
Okay, the Philippines recognizes the importance of pursuing sustainable infrastructure to meet our climate challenges and achieve resilience in the global economy. We also acknowledge that strong political will and a long-term vision are necessary to narrow the infrastructure gap and reverse our underinvestment in this sector. I'm confident that our combined resources and unified vision in ASEAN, we can together achieve a greener and more sustainable economy in the region through sustainable infrastructure development.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Mr. Amin Liu.
Thank you. So I always tell investors outside this region, outside ASEAN, if you look at the Asia financial crisis back in 1998, 1997, how quickly ASEAN countries recover from it. And also the global financial crisis in 2008, how quickly we recover from it. And we are therefore a very dynamic region. We are hungry. We need a lot of investment. And we are open for business.
Thank you very much. That's the tagline right there. We're open for business. Mr. Stephen?
I think we all agree that infrastructure development is key, but the dilemma of MOF, Ministry of Finance, is always balancing between fiscal sustainability as well as the need for development. I like what DPM Lawrence talk about. Perhaps begin with the end in mind. What we aspire for our country, what we aspire for our region in terms of green technology, in terms of climate change, in terms of digitalization, and then we work backwards, governizing our resources within the framework of good governance. I think this is very important. We talk about PPP, important, but I think this must happen within the framework of good governance. And finally, I think it is, it's worth repeating that we need to strengthen the collaboration within ASEAN and capitalizing on our joint strength in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Ibu Sri Mulyani, if you may conclude our panel discussion today.
Well, first I would like to thank all the finance minister who attend today's conference or seminar. The takeaway, the first is actually from listening all the panelists, we can learn each other, and hopefully with this learning each other, we can catching up faster, because there are so many lessons learned which is provided by each country. And the beauty of ASEAN is actually the different states of development, creating more opportunity for working together. Second one, I think when we look at the geopolitical situation in which the world is becoming more fragmented and divided, it is very enlightening, and as well as for all of us to be courageous to feel that the ASEAN is becoming the place in which each country working to address our own homework, but at the same time also feeling that we need to work even stronger together and recover together. This is like the G20 tagline. this ASEAN has become a epicentrum of growth, which is true because we rely and need more each other when the rest of the world is becoming so unpredictable and divided. The third one, I think, on infrastructure, we are talking from the very basic infrastructure like clean water, road, in this case, up to the more now updated and sophisticated from the green infrastructure, digital infrastructure, which then requiring us to continue look at the first policy framework. Do we have the right policy? The second one, addressing the risk, because risk and return and then link to the financing. That's become the link that we need to continue learning. And third is actually mobilizing both private and multilateral institutions to work for us. Not we work for them, but they work for us in this case. And because this is all finance minister, then we are all the one who need to continue looking at each other and see how we can learn. And I don't really see in this case the spirit in which we are competing, but we really working very closely. So I would like to thank you for all the finance minister ASEAN who attending this second ministerial meeting. Never happened, so we really love to have this second meeting, and very timely because the world is becoming a not okay situation. So if we are getting together and look okay, I think that's also become a good news for the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati. So we are the epicentrum of growth, as Ibu Sri Mulyani also described. Not just an epicentrum to be okay. So we're growing. We're growing further, and we're doing that together. Once again, I would like to thank all panelists. Thank you very much for your time with us today, especially for candidly addressing all the challenges. It's very refreshing to hear what has been said on this panel today. I apologize for any wrongdoings and mistakes as well, but I'm sure that there's a lot that we could take away from our panel today, and also the complexities that we have. We will be challenging, or will be challenging us in the future. It's rife, but the challenges are not insurmountable. They stand as opportunities for innovation, cooperation, and growth. And I guess ASEAN will be the epicentrum for that. So once again, it is an honor to talk to everyone. Excellencies, thank you very much for your time. And we'd like to see the collaboration that we will see among our finance ministers in ASEAN in the future. And with that, I will close this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator and all panelists. We're pleased to all of you to remain on the stage to have group photo. We would like to invite the second moderator and also all panelists to join group photo sessions on the stage. Once again, we're pleased to all of you to remain on the stage to have photo group sessions. And also we would like to invite the second moderator and all panelists to join group photo sessions on the stage. Again, we would like to invite the second moderator and all panelists to join group photo sessions together on the stage. Please, you may give the warmest smile on my count. 1, 2, 3. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Once again, thank you, Ibu Sri Mulyani and all the ministers of Finance ASEAN member countries, all panelists and moderators. Please give big round of applause for the Panel 1 dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 5 minutes to have coffee break. Before we continue to the panel 2, you may enjoy some snacks and beverages outside the ballroom, and thank you. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we have 5 minutes to have coffee break. You may enjoy some snacks and beverages outside the ballroom for about 5 minutes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we cordially invite you to be seated at the seat provided since the panel 2 is about to begin. We have 4 minutes left to start panel 2. Ladies and gentlemen, we cordially invite you to be seated at the seat provided since the panel 2 is about to begin. Once again, we cordially invite you to the seat provided that because of the panel 2 is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly invite you to be seated at the seat provided since the panel 2 is about to begin. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we kindly invite you to be seated at the seat provided since the panel 2 is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly invite you to be seated at the seat provided since the panel 2 is about to begin. Once again, please, you may enter the ballroom to continue the panel 2. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please we invite you to be seated at the seat provided since the panel 2 is about to begin. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Now we continue to the panel 2 dialogue, Innovative Financing Models. This panel will be moderated by Bapak Adri Pusoro. He is one of the best specialists in urban infrastructure financing, municipal finance, fiscal decentralization, disaster risk management, international money and finance, tax policy, econometric and modeling, financial and also economic forecasting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bapak Adri Pusoro.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I will be your moderator for today's discussions. Hopefully, we will have also interesting discussions. We have a high caliber panelists. Without further ado, I will invite our panelists to the stage. Mr. Edwin Syaruzat, President Director of PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure. Mr. Marat Zaparov, Chief Executive Officer of Pentagreen Capital of Singapore. Mr. Dani Alexander, Vice President for Policy and Strategy of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Mr. Arif Budiman, Deputy CEO Indonesian Investment Authority. Mr. Akira Moreto, Indonesia Country Manager and Head of Partnership of United Nations Office for Project Services, UNOPS. Mr. Alfredo Perdiguero, Director of the Regional Cooperation and Operations for the Nation Division in the Southeast Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank, as well as Mr. Kelvin Lester Kelly, who joined us online, Commissioner of Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines. Welcome, gentlemen. To give you a better context, we will dive in the discussions into a range of innovative financings that can be replicated and also scale up in the regions. When I mentioned about the innovative financing here, basically financing that can foster the positive impact of environmentally, economically, as well as socially. So without further ado, I will let the first speaker, Bapak Edwin Sarusat, the CEO of PT Sarana Infrastructure, SOE, owned by Ministry of Finance, Government of Indonesia, that focuses on financings, advisory, as well as on project development. So the floor is yours, Pak Edwin, for your presentations. You have 8 minutes to having this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adri. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I think when it comes to innovative financing, let me put in the context that PTSMI involved very heavily in the public-private partnerships. And to us, I think there are 3 elements of innovative financing. First, from the angle of the private finance, of course, private finance is, I think, supporting investors who are the winning bidder of the PPP projects, so that I think exposure of private finance can be a spectrum of long-term finance, starting from senior loan, subordinated loans, and I think if that's also be part of the de-risking mechanism, such as cash deficiency support facilities, and many others pieces of the layer of the financing that is particularly supporting the success of the PPPs and investors. Of course, equity is also part of the important and catalytic role in the project finance, in every project finance. And when it comes to equity, aside from equity which is coming from the strategic investors, the players who are involved in infrastructure space, equity can also coming from the infrastructure fund, pension fund, and many other long-term and saving institutions. That's number one when it comes to innovative from the perspective of private finance. And second one is from the perspective of public finance, because public finance is, I think, the role of government, the role of contracting agency, because the choices to at the end of the day to the PPP is the choices between government and the private side. And I think when it comes to the government, again, it is the choices between whether it is or infrastructure is going to be delivered by public money. In this particular case, budget, whether central budget or local government budget. And of course, delegated to the private side when the project is partially or equally financed by user pay and taxpayers' money. So I think with regard to that, SMI is quite a unique institution, and we are also supporting local government. So our source of our lending instrument to the local government can also be part of the source of the public finance to deliver infrastructure development, whether it is on their authority or it is under central government. So the range of contribution can also coming from other source of financing or source of borrowing that whether local government or central government is going to tap into. So there are also opportunity that local government tap into local currency municipal bond market whenever it is existed, and central government also tap into a global bond or local currency bond. So all in all, I think the determination is about what is best cost of capital and what is best in terms of the speed of execution in such way project can be delivered. So that's the second one. Innovative financing can be also innovative financing with regard to the whether subnational or central government financing modality. And the last part, yeah, I think it is much more relevant to the PPP is innovative financing from the project point of view. Because as perhaps Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence has already mentioned, the project solution is also important, and within that context, yeah, whether the government or contracting agency would like to choose or would like to employ added support or instrument to the project, whether it is in the form of availability payment, yeah, viability gap funding, yeah, it is also becoming the element of the innovative finance. So all in all, what kind of blended financing, yeah, involved as a part of the project solution that can, deliver infrastructure development in a more speediest manner, first thing first, and secondly, that can deliver infrastructure development in a more fair resharing mechanism, and I think more importantly, closing the gap of risk and return, yeah, whether risk and return to the equity investors or the risk and return to the lenders involved in the PPPs. I think that would be the beauty of innovative financing when it comes to the angle of the project solution. Lastly, perhaps when it comes to project solution, we have also factor into account any new conceptual framework that can be applied to the project solution, such as, I think, something beyond project, for instance, land value capture, yeah, which is essentially bringing project into broader perspective that can also potentially, yeah, reduce the, what you call it, reduce the employment of the balance sheet of the public side, and bringing that kind of potential source of cash flow that cannot be seen, and I think that could be some potential also become solution to the projects. I think I will stop my speak here.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Edwin. So what we heard that PTSMI over the years basically expand its role, its financing roles, as well as financing to local governments and also to renewables, and also broaden up their financial products. So now I turn to the second speaker, Mr. Marat Zaparov, CEO of Pentagreen Capital. Just want to give a little bit background on Pentagreen Capital. It's a debt financing platform based in Singapore, subsidiary body of Temasek and HSBC, dedicated to accelerating the development of sustainable infrastructure in Asia, with an initial focus on Southeast Asia. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you very much for having me on this panel. It's great to be here amongst such experienced and illustrious institutions such as PTSMI, AIIB. We are perhaps the youngest financial institution in the Asia market focused on sustainable infrastructure finance. So we have a lot to learn, much more than we have to share. But nevertheless, I would like to explain or give our take on the infrastructure finance problem and what HSBC and Temasek, together with our strategic partners, Asian Development Bank and Clifford Capital, what we are looking to do. The infrastructure development problem is of course multifaceted, and we are focused on the financing problem itself. And if I could have this slide, thank you very much. Particularly focused on finding ways to increase the flow of debt financing for private sector projects in particular, in sustainable infrastructure in ASEAN. And if we think of the problem statement at a high level, we've heard already a number of times, it's really a question of risk and reward, and how do you bridge the two such that large pools of commercial capital, institutional investment can flow into greenfield infrastructure in the ASEAN region. We always hear of the huge gaps in infrastructure investment, so I won't repeat the numbers, but it's always trillions and trillions of dollars. Doesn't really matter how many trillions. I think it's the scale of the problem, and ultimately, again, the reason for lack of the flow of liquidity into projects always comes down to this issue of bankability. And again, that gets discussed again and again. And a lot of effort to date, and this very important effort needs to continue, has been put on the preparation of projects, the project design phase, the enabling framework, the so-called early stage, the upstream work that needs to be done in order to improve the bankability of projects. However, I think the real world is very nuanced and difficult, and probably the discovery that all of us infrastructure practitioners have made over the last few years is that, yes, indeed, you can spend a lot of time, effort, project development dollars focused on designing and preparing projects. But in a lot of cases, what you will probably find is that after all that effort, the project may still not meet all of the typical bankability criteria that a commercial financial institution, a bank, or even at times a multilateral might apply. So the project never quite becomes fully bankable, right? There is still friction in ability of that project to attract finance. Blended finance is one way to address the issue. But again, blended finance seems to, well, deal volumes have actually stagnated over the years, which is a little bit worrying. And with this picture in mind, what the four partners behind Pentagreen, HSBC, Temasek, ADB, and Clifford Capital, decided to do is to essentially look at the problem slightly differently and think of bankability as more of a, rather than a binary, something is bankable or not bankable, it's more of a spectrum, right? Yes, there will be projects that are classically bankable for a commercial bank, multilateral development bank, even institutional investors at times who can come into project bonds and other instruments. There are projects that we can clearly say, hey, this is unbankable. Either it's fundamentally flawed or needs a lot more work to move it into that bankable bucket. But somewhere in the middle, there are a whole range of projects, situations, assets, which are not quite typically bankable. But when you look at them with a particular mindset and with from a point of view of a particular institution with the right kind of level of risk appetite and the right kind of return requirements, there may be something that can be financed. And looking at the data out of the whole project universe that may be out there in the emerging markets in particular, maybe only 5 to 10% are bankable, but this perhaps 25 to 35% can be considered, and we call this the marginally bankable projects. So that's what we are focused on at Pentagreen Capital. Next slide, please. So this platform, as mentioned, HSBC, Temasek, ADB, and Clifford Capital coming together, focused on the various sustainable infrastructure sectors. Temasek and HSBC have committed $150 million of initial capital. It's quite a modest amount when it comes to the infrastructure investment needs, but really the desire of the shareholders and the intent is to use that initial capital as a first step to demonstrate the thesis, right? That indeed there is this marginally bankable project set out there that can be financed in a sustainable manner. Next slide, please. And the next slide, please. just a brief on what we've been doing over the past year or so, and we're just under a year old as an institution, so very young institution. Very comforting to say that we believe that the thesis is the right one. We have since inception evaluated over 70 individual project opportunities. We have taken on board and signed mandates with 2 of them, and we have 5 or 6 additional situations which we are in advanced evaluation on. So very comforting for us that indeed the problem that we thought we are out to address, it indeed exists. Next slide, please. And the next slide. And ultimately, with the initial $150 million from Temasek HSBC, that will, of course, only get us to a certain point. We can do, what, 5 or 6 deals with that maximum finance, 5 or 6 individual projects. And the question is, how do you scale this type of approach? How do you find a way to bring the real large volumes of commercial capital into this marginally bankable project set? And that, of course, starts to lead you down the route of blended finance, down the route of de-risking. But de-risking perhaps not only at the individual project by project level, but de-risking at some sort of an aggregated financing vehicle level by using concessionary capital in the form of junior tranches, risk-bearing tranches that will uplift the credit risk that you are able to deliver to a commercial financier or a commercial investor. And this way, we believe, is the right way to unlock large flows of commercial capital into a difficult, marginally bankable set of projects and do it at scale. So I'll pause there and I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marat. Now we have a speaker from AIB, Mr. Dani Alexander, Vice President for Policy and Strategy of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. He oversees AIB's operational policy and their implementation, as well as strategic directions. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Vice President Sir Danny, firstly, I convey his apologies. He can't join all of you this afternoon. But again, my name is Ping. I'm with his department. And we support a lot of policy strategy work in the bank. We thank the organizers again for giving us space to speak at this very important high-level policy dialogue. The next slide, please. Yes. Next slide. So very quickly, my presentation this afternoon, I will give an overview of what the bank is doing, the challenges and solutions when it comes to infrastructure investments, at least from the portfolio that we have, the bank being a relatively new player, what we face and how we intend to solve or how we are solving, and then some of our views on regional infrastructure development. Next. Ladies and gentlemen, so the bank, we started operations in January 2016. So we have been in operations about 7 years. Our main focus is really to invest in infrastructure. So you could see financing in infrastructure is our core activity. We are a multilateral institution. We are AAA credit rated by the 3 global credit rating agencies. And we have very much a stretchable balance sheet. Next. So very quickly, what do we invest in? In all our investments that we make sure that it's aligned to at least one of the 4 thematic priorities that you see on this slide here. When we say green infrastructure, we mean climate financing. Number 2, it's about connectivity and regional cooperation. So we invest in roads, toll highways, ports, seaports, airports. We also moved into the digital infrastructure space during COVID because we realized how important digital infrastructure is in our daily lives and in times of emergency and disaster as well. Last but not least, we are cognizant of the fact that public capital is insufficient to meet infrastructure financing needs of today. Based on that, we need to crowd in private capital. So that's again a core pillar when we make investment decisions. Next. So our range of financial instruments as a multilateral bank, we do public-private sector lending all in one balance sheet. We make very selective equity investments as well, mainly in financial intermediaries who may know the domestic market better, who can then lend on to infrastructure project owners and sponsors in those domestic markets or in those regions. Last but not least, we are diversifying our financial tools. Early this year, we started introducing guarantee products as well. Next. The next slide, please. Right. There's a key point here I just want to make, and the message here is that we adopt high project standards. What we mean by that is that we are a multilateral institution, so we have an environmental social framework that we adopt each time we invest, each time we do project due diligence, and the framework is benchmarked against international standards. The standards set, for example, by the ADB, by the World Bank, and also by other European multilateral institutions. So it covers ENS, environmental and social. We also have a procurement framework. We have a team that analyzes the financial projections as well of the project to make sure that it is feasible, it is viable. Last but not least, when it comes to sovereign lending, we also adopt IMF recommendations when it comes to the country's fiscal space. Next. Right. We heard just now from the esteemed guests in session 1, the esteemed ministers. Before I jump into that, the key message here I want to say is infrastructure financing is risky, and that is why in most of our countries we have dedicated national development banks, infrastructure development banks doing this financing. It is inherently risky. And if the setting is a developing economy, the risk is even higher, the risk premium adds on. And so if we look at the baseline challenges, what are the risks? The risk comes in the form of acquiring the land, possibly resettling people, the environmental social impact. But now we have this climate additionality. So we have to think of that, right? And we need to make infrastructure assets more sustainable, looking at existing assets, making sure they are resilient. Over and above that, we need to digitalize some data, because when we have data, then we are able to make the assets more resilient when it comes to the technical specifications of the asset. Next. Right, so again, the climate additionality is making infrastructure financing a little bit more complicated than what it used to be, but it is a necessity. And I just want to highlight here when it comes to implementation solutions, one thing we have learned from our 6-7 years in operations is this term called front-end loading. What we mean by front-end loading is when we start designing and structuring the financing, designing the project, so that's where we need to spend more time. We need to make sure extensive consultation with the borrower, the contractor, the local communities, yeah, to make sure that we get buy-in, right? And to make sure that the business model is sustainable once it is in operations, once the asset is in operation. So front-end loading is important. Over and above that, there's a need to integrate the climate components. So as of 1st of July, we have joined our peer MDBs like the ADB in making sure that our investment operations are fully Paris aligned. So what do we mean by that? It means that we conduct a climate risk assessment for all infrastructure projects. Where there's a need, we must have an adaptation plan to make sure that the communities are included in adaptation measures, climate considerations into project design. So these are key. And to make sure that we do the proper monitoring and reporting when the assets are in operations or when it's a project implementation stage. Next. So now the regional infrastructure development, how do we view it? There are 4 key trends here that we have noticed, especially pertaining to Southeast Asia. We are noting this huge movement towards clean energy transition. Digitalization is another one. Urbanization is another one, putting a lot of pressure on infrastructure, especially in urban areas. Last but not least, we are seeing a very fragmented display of supply chain and logistics infrastructure. So it is very clear the public fiscal space of most Southeast Asian countries are insufficient, and some of the ministers have alluded to that. We need to bring in the private investors. And my last point is, again, due credit actually is due to the ADB for initiating these innovative instruments, the energy transition mechanism, the Asian Climate Green Facility. My last slide. Yeah. So my last slide here is about this small facility that we just launched together with the ASEAN Secretariat and the MCDF. So we have this grant, it's not big, about 2.5 million. It can be used for project information sharing, for institutional capacity building, also for project preparation, but early stage project preparation. And then we have the MCDF fund to back up for further expenditure needed to bring the project to bankability. And all this is under the ASEAN Connectivity Master Plan that the ministers have mentioned earlier. So in summary, again, we are an infrastructure bank and we would love to do more for ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just want to add a little bit on what you just said, that basically the pace of economic growth should be accompanied by the pattern of the growth itself, right? Meaning there is no degradation or decline on natural capitals. So now we are moving to the fourth speaker, Mr. Arif Budiman. Mr. Arif Budiman is Deputy CEO of Indonesian Investment Authority or Indonesia Sovereign Wealth Funds. What we would like to hear from you is basically the INA unique strengths aiming to contribute to Indonesia's sustainable development targets.
Thank you. We are probably I am certainly among the least experienced among this panel. So I'm just going to do who we are, what we do, and then let people judge what we do. Hopefully we are not doing too far off from our mission. First, with a brief introduction of INA, or Indonesian Investment Authority. We are Indonesian Sovereign Wealth Fund, quote unquote. Even though it is more, for those of you who are more economists, it's more strategic investment fund, where we are established with two mandates. Number one, obviously, is to invest for future generation, but more importantly, number two is to invite co-investments into the country, primarily. Our investments are largely equity. We can do mezzanine, but the vast majority is equity. We were given initial capital of $5 billion. Right now we are managing roughly $9 billion. We are only 2-year-old, so slightly older than Pentagreen, but not that by that much. So far in a 2-year in operation, we have deployed $3 billion, $2 billion from our capital and $1 billion from our investment partners. Next. We report as an institution directly to the President of Indonesia. Our supervisory board includes a couple of ex-officios, Minister of Finance, Minister of State-owned Enterprise, plus 3 independents, but the day-to-day operation runs largely by the executive board. Next. Obviously, we follow international standard. We are a full-time member of International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Fund, following Santiago Principles within less than a year. And we are trying our best to do the right governance and so on and so forth. Last year, we are among the top 5 most improved sovereign wealth fund in these aspects. So hopefully we are not doing something that is too out of way. Next. These are our primary, because I understand that this is the focus of the today's forum is infrastructure, but we have a number of priority investment areas. Actually, our real focus are on the top, the 4. Infrastructure logistics, toll road, seaport, airport, estates, green energy and transformation, renewables, ETM, among others, digital, in particular digital infra actually, and healthcare, hospitals, clinics, among others. The rest, we are still doing things more on opportunistic basis. And how do we invest? Next, probably. There are a number of types and a number of approach where we invest. One would be us, INA, and our investment partners can go independently to an investee with some cooperation agreement. Second, which is more prevalent to date, is us and our investment partners creating a platform, quote-unquote platform. It means a JV or SPV, whatever it is, and to invest in multiple investment opportunities. And the last one, which we are still developing, for example, for electric vehicle, GPLP fund structure, where we are trying to become a co-GP with more established players. And this is what we have done to date in 2.5 years, roughly $3 billion. We started investing in digital infra together with GIC, ADIA and ADG, which is another UAE sovereign wealth fund. In toll road, we are partnering with ADIA and APG, a Dutch pension fund. In digital, we partner with BlackRock, Allianz, Orion. In healthcare, we are partnering with Silk Road Fund, which is a fund created by CIC, China Exim, among others. In green, we're partnering with Masdar, and we have a number of other partnerships, both with financial institutions, i.e. sovereign wealth fund, pension fund, any other institutional investors, strategic such as DP World, where we are actually investing in ports, among others. So just to give maybe 3 types of examples, real life examples, maybe next. So first, this is just a co-investment where we jointly with Masdar put forward roughly $500 million into geothermal power. So in Indonesia, basically for baseload power, you either have hydro and geothermal, which is very, very important. So this particular company is actually one of the largest Indonesian companies, top 3 in the world. And we jointly with Masdar come into this company in its IPO. So that is one example, which is more public market capital participation. The second example is actually more on, if you can move on to the next page, which is more on creating a platform. In this case, it's basically part of capital recycling of ports. This is for a port in North Sumatra of Indonesia, where we jointly with DP World, one of the international global terminal operators, creating a consortium and starting with an asset in North Sumatra. And this basically providing capital for future expansion for this North Sumatran port. But the vision is more than this. So if you move on to the next, our cooperation with DP World is worth $7.5 billion over the next 30 years. So this is not only port is only one. Our investment thesis is actually the entire maritime sector, which includes ICDs, last mile access, potentially shipping or containerization in Indonesia. So this is just another example where we and our strategic partner creating a platform, which is slightly different from the first one. The third, obviously we have our couple of partners where we try to actually participate in blended financing. So next chart, apologies for a very complicated chart on the left, but blended financing is always complicated. So we basically, ADB and PT SMI, which is actually the country platform for energy transition, basically acquiring coal-fired power plants and trying to accelerate its retirement. ADB, thank you for providing a concession financing on the debt side. Whereas INA, when a few equity partners, for example, GIAP has been very instrumental in this, is actually providing equity solutions. So this is actually a blended finance, concession, a commercial, but also equity side where we are actually providing that solution, whereas ADB and PTSMI are providing that solutions. So that's probably just an example. I'm not sure whether there is anything to be learned, but at least with our mandate, we are trying to invite different type of capital into Indonesia. Many of the people in the panel today is more on the debt side. We'll be more than happy to share our experience and partner with many. And within ASEAN, obviously we have invested with GIC. We are in active discussion, obviously, with Temasek for, let's say, modern logistics, Malaysia, among others. And we are here, we are still young, still many things to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Arif. So now we move on to the fifth speaker, Mr. Akira Moreto, the Indonesia Country Manager and Head of Partnership of UNOPS. So we have heard from the private side, we have heard from MDBs, and also now we would like to hear from the UN on how you been doing thus far to basically to support the sustainable infrastructure development. Thanks.
Thank you, Pa. So my name is Akira Moreto, and I'm the country manager for the United Nations Office for Project Services in Indonesia. And it's a great pleasure to be here today and share our experience on something that we've been working on for quite some time now. Next. Next slide. So if I can, I'd like to start with a little bit of the history of UNOPS, because UNOPS is a rather atypical UN agency in the sense that we do not have a policy mandate, and we work mostly at an operational level, focusing on project management, infrastructure, and procurement types of operations on behalf of partners to run sustainable projects on the ground. Moreover, UNOPS is the only fully self-financing agency in the UN system, meaning that we do not receive any assessed contributions from UN member states, and we operate a little bit like a private firm in the UN system. UNOPS is actually today the 5th largest UN agency in terms of delivery. Last year, in 2022, we delivered $2.5 billion of development assistance globally, which may come as a surprise to many of you because you probably have never heard about UNOPS, right? And this is largely because of our operational mandate. We were established in 1974 as a department of UNDP and became an independent self-financing agency in 1995. Next. Now, for the past 30 years, UNOPS has been responsible for infrastructure projects all over the world. We currently work in 120 countries with offices in 80 countries, and we have a contingent, a personnel contingent of about 8,000 people. So we're quite a large organization focused on technical advisory, infrastructure, and implementation types of projects in the infrastructure sector. And since 2015, since the launch of the SDGs, we've been called upon by partners increasingly more to identify financing for development solutions in the infrastructure sector. As a UN organization, we work mostly on the government side, but increasingly we've also been asked to look at the investor side and the bodies investing on these types of schemes, including national pension funds, providing them with technical due diligence types of services to mobilize financing for development. And this is because national pension funds are realizing that infrastructure typically has longer-term investment horizons than bonds or equity securities, and because sovereign finance has limitations ultimately to fund the needs for infrastructure that are needed for the sustainable development goals. So today I want to talk about one example of innovative financing through our experience in mobilizing funds from national pension funds, and I will also explain where the private sector comes in later. Next. So there's several best practices around the world in this sphere. For example, in Canada, Chile, Honduras, where national pension funds have been getting heavily involved in infrastructure investments. And many public and private finance projects involving national pension funds in Chile, UK, Australia, and other places have actually come out very successfully, with very successful outcomes. And this is because involving national pension funds creates really a win-win scenario, which is what I'm trying to show in this diagram. So national social protection can get better returns. It provides an opportunity to diversify national portfolios of investments if they participate in infrastructure financing. And the financing made available complements what can be done by international lenders. So national pension funds should really not have any major problems in participating in long-term currency assets in country because ultimately they can see interest in having transparent investments as long as they comply with regulatory requirements and have proper mechanism at origination. But in order to make them viable, just based on our experience, it's important to de-risk projects and make them bankable through the provision of transparent technical assistance. Next. Moreover, projects that involve national pension funds can help address the issue of national debt and move big pools of money for developing. Actually, this is nothing new. It happens a lot in many other countries around the world. But the major roadblock remains effective origination, transparency, and bankability of projects. In this regard, UNOPS is actually very well positioned to support this area, since our role in development is really to transfer capacities and help government entities. And being a multilateral organization, we can actually sign agreements directly with the government and help them with the origination of projects. And transparency is essential to be successful in tendering competitive PPP contracts. Next. So UNOPS has been supporting countries around the world in project preparation for a number of years. And when the UN is involved, this provides reassurances to the government and also to investors that projects are prepared transparently. For us as a UN organization, ultimately reputation is everything. In project preparation, what we typically look at is pre-feasibility, feasibility, financial viability, assessment and constraints, as well as risks, the business case, and the legal and regulatory requirement. And UNOPS uses its own teams to execute the eligibility assessments, and this includes project managers, economists, lawyers, experts depending on the subject we're talking about, and so on. Next. Now, this is the case of a recent assignment we had in Honduras in Latin America, where the government was interested in consolidating all government complexes, including all ministries, in one 220 square meter complex. In this case, the government contracted a consulting firm to carry out the design and the costing for financing of this new structure. And national pension funds who wanted to invest in the project called on UNOPS to really look at the technical aspects, the legal aspects of the contract, and the financing model, and carry out a transparent assessment on the needs to achieve approval by pension fund investment boards. And this created and enabled pension funds to really access better returns. Again, we have many examples where we have been advising public bodies to leverage financing for development. From our experience, the main challenge during preparation and implementation of projects is really independent technical advisory to develop capacity at national units and build investor confidence. The Honduras case was a PPP scheme through a 25-year concession of which 15 years was to repay lenders. It was a $240 million investment, and the winning private contractor, a Mexican company, provided 25% equity, and debt financing was provided 74% of the 75% by 4 pension funds, and the remaining came from 5 private banks. This was a syndicated loan, and UNOPS basically advised pension funds on the syndicated loan. And repayments were guaranteed through rent and commercial spaces, 90% from the government and the rest from variable commercial income. And the outcome was really that the government rent expenses went down with annual savings of 20 million per year. And on the other side, pension funds, for them, the main focus was really transparency and trust that there was sufficient protection to secure the repayments. Next. Now, let me conclude by saying that UNOPS is currently working to mobilize public and private finance infrastructure through a regional project preparation facility. In Indonesia, we are currently in discussion with the Indonesia Guarantee Fund to provide technical assistance in project preparation and establish a funding mechanism to attract financing from multilateral development banks and interested contributors. We're also having discussions with the Indonesian New Capital Development Authority on project preparation, and we are also in discussion with the government of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao in the Philippines for several transport and power energy projects, including the new Cotabato Airport. Also, some discussions are taking place in Cambodia. Ultimately, as a UN organization, UNOPS does not bring financing, but rather technical assistance, capacity building, and transparency. However, through this kind of expertise in project preparation, we have a track record in raising billions of dollars in infrastructure investments. And partners usually call on the UN or UNOPS because we have no economic interest, We are focused on achieving sustainable implementation. We can provide the expertise whenever it's needed and focus on transferring knowledge to government teams. UNOPS expects to support more projects development in the ASEAN region as it's done in several other countries and really add new sources of financing additionally and complementary to international financial institution loans, which can foster public and private international investor confidence to participate in public tenders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Akira. So before moving to the sixth speaker, I just want to give you some analysis done by ADB, where ADB forecasts that the growth in Asia regions this year and next year will be around 5%, one of the highest growing regions in the world. Despite this high growth, combined with urbanizations, growing population, as well as climate change, is basically creates even larger investment gap, right? Not to mention the degradations of the infrastructure itself. So without further ado, I will let Mr. Alfredo Perdeguero, the Regional Head of Regional Cooperation and Integration Unit, Southeast Asia Department, Asian Development Bank. Over to you.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. Yeah, from the Asian Development Bank, we really have been working on infrastructure for more than half a century. Clearly, we have not done enough because still the gap is huge. But of course, every year we have been, the majority probably of our financing has gone into infrastructure. That was for half a century, and about 7-8 years ago, I think we started realizing that that even was not enough. We needed to start thinking on more innovative ways to actually finance infrastructure. We were lucky because we have two very different banks within our bank. We have one that is providing loans and investments to the private sector directly, and one that is providing loans to the public sector. And we were very lucky because we are in the same building, all of us, and we were not really working very closely together until 7-8 years ago. At that time, we thought it was very, very important to start working together. It was important to start supporting also countries for you to bring you and to bring your public investment together with your public and private investment together. We start working with OPPP centers in the countries and how to develop those, viability gaps, financing, laws on PPPs. So this is an area in which we have been trying to do more and more in the innovative financing. To make things even, maybe a bit more complicated but more relevant, of course, recently we have transformed into a climate bank. We're huge objective on, $100 billion by 2030 financing for climate. And of course, infrastructure is a very, very important portion of that climate financing. It will continue. So although it's not in our name, we are not an infrastructure bank, we are a development bank, but however, infrastructure has been and will remain very important. With ASEAN, ASEAN Plus 3, we prepared very recently a report. This report, of course, with all the governments involved, and the Singaporean government was leading this in the working group, with examples, concrete examples of infrastructure, innovative infrastructure financing, focus more on sustainable financing. We have 15 examples. I encourage you to look into this document. I could be for 2 hours talking about this, but instead of doing so today, I would like to put you just 3 examples, simply on 3 things that we are trying to do with some of the ASEAN countries. Ministers refer sometimes to the need to do a specific project. So the first example will be on a project. Maybe that's not enough, but you will see the project needs to be replicated, and if they are replicated, that's important. The second will be a national facility, which is trying to scale up something that can do many projects instead of one. And the third will be the way to develop capital markets, and especially the bond markets. Let me start with the first one, which is a project in Cambodia. Next slide. Yeah, and next. We call it the Sustainable Coastal and Marine Fisheries Project. As you can imagine, Cambodia has a big coast. They have 200,000 people, and the communities living close to the coast. They do lots of fisheries. The fisheries industry is a very important one, but it's very underdeveloped yet. There's huge potential now to develop that, the private sector industries in fisheries, marine fisheries, a huge potential. At the same time, even they are being very small, they are depleting the few fisheries resources that they have. And they have a huge challenge there on how to manage appropriately those resources. So we came out with a project with the government in just last year to enhance and make these coastal and marine ecosystems more sustainable and to improve the adaptation capacity, the food security and the livelihood of the coastal communities. This, for ADB standards, is a small project, but it's the first time that ADB do a project in fisheries, and it's the first time that we do such a big project this size in this sector. It's quite innovative. We are able to mobilize not only loans, by the way, we're a bank, but we are able now to mobilize lots of grant financing. And you can see $22 million of grant were mobilized for this project, in addition to the money from ADB, a loan, and in addition to the money from the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund. This is the fund that is owned, this is the biggest infrastructure financing facility that ASEAN countries have established. In fact, I am the administrator of this facility. So all together, plus also with our colleagues from France, we put together a project to actually develop that. This project is a very, it provides solutions not only in terms of changing legislation, regulations, improve regulations, provide infrastructure, but also working very closely with the private sector to develop SME incubators, working with them on how can they have more sustainable practices for marine fisheries. So without collaborating private and public sector, this will simply not work. The resources will be depleted, and then there will be no more fish to fish. With this project, we expect not only will remain the project, but it will be expanded and will create many new opportunities for developing even more private sector into this interesting sector. Let me move into the second example, which is a facility. And of course, we are very lucky in Indonesia that we have PTSMI. Great, of course, institution, great initiative. So we work with PTSMI to come up with, going a little bit deeper into what we're doing to create a green finance facility. The idea was that they couldn't find enough bankable projects that were truly green. So we partnered with them to, please, the next slide. There. Next, we are partnering with PTSMI to identify a pipeline of green projects using taxonomy, a green taxonomy for those projects. And we are able or expecting to mobilize $1 to $8 probably dollars. For every dollar, we expect that maybe $8 will be mobilized. In this projection that I put you here, this budget, we are being very conservative and only putting $1 to $3. But the expectation is that the money will be recycled and we will be able to catalyze up to 8 times the money that has been put together here. We are already starting to have, this is for only 10 projects. We expect to do even more. And already, I have to say, we have one project, the first one already approved. It was a water supply project for $10 million. We are now also working and preparing on other projects in renewable energy. This is very promising. And as we said, this allowed us to go on a scale. We don't have to go project by project. But actually, that will create the opportunity for private institutional investors and commercial investors to come together and work together with PTSMI to come up with feasible projects. We also provide technical assistance because, as mentioned by many of the ministers, it is very difficult to identify and to structure good projects and to measure appropriate balance of risk. Let me move now to the last example, which is also something that probably we need at a scale. Next slides. Next, please. Next. And this refers to the need to develop the capital markets and especially the green, social, and sustainable bond issuance. The going project by project is good. Going through national facilities is good. But there's also huge opportunities when you develop capital markets. And Thailand had a very clear vision. Actually, Minister Arkom is actually with us today, still here. They had a very clear vision that that was the way they wanted to go, as many other, by the way, ASEAN countries wanted to go. How to develop GSS bonds to really attract much more capital at a scale really into green financing. So we worked with them, we partnered with them. That was not easy to start because this is a new area. It was an area in which there was still low capacities on how to identify the framework, what was the framework for the green and thematic bonds. We work with them. We also look at the cost, identify the cost and minimize the cost of the bonds, and to process the whole, we accompany them with the whole process to issue those bonds. How to identify the projects was also very important, and how to work with the rating agencies to look at the credit ratings and the perceptions of risk for this new issuance. So I have presented to you, just to summarize, 3 examples. These are not the only ones. As I recommend to you, there are many, many other ways to actually do innovative financing and sustainable financing. But I hope this gives us a sample of what we do. And of course, the ETM has been mentioned in many occasions. I don't repeat because everybody talk about energy transition mechanism. So I was tempted not to repeat that. But of course, I think that is a replicable mechanism that I think very promising for infrastructure financing, which is very innovative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alfredo. So now we move to our last presenter who joined us online, Mr. Kelvin Lester Kelly, the Commissioner of Security and Exchange Commissions of the Philippines. Over to you, Mr. Kelvin.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you, Pak. I hope everyone can hear me. I apologize for not being there personally. My schedule is just so horrible. I just couldn't fly there on time and get back to my other meetings today. So I'm really sorry. But in any case, let me just go through with you very quickly some of the innovative measures that are available not strictly infrastructure, admittedly, but these are different financing mechanisms, different alternative financing mechanisms, which have been used as a good example within the Philippines. In fact, some of the speakers earlier has alluded to them already. In particular on the ETM, which there was a different version here in the Philippines called ETF, and of course the GSS bond issuance support by the ADB. I can give you an example now of a successful use case in a moment. So next slide, please. Oh, sorry. I think that's the last slide. Can we go to my first slide, please? Well, anyway, my discussion is fairly short. Now, the first slide essentially just oh, sorry. Yes, next slide, please. Essentially, I thought I'd give you a quick overview of what the SEC is in the Philippines, because we're not strictly speaking like your OJK in Indonesia. I speak to your Pakinano very often, and it turns out we're not exactly the same. It turns out the Philippine SEC, we are also the company registrar. So we also register companies. We're also like your company house, aside from being the securities regulator. And these are some of the laws that we deal with. And as you will see, because of the mandate in relation to capital market regulation, securities regulation, we will certainly touch upon the issue of specific innovative finance, green finance, sustainability finance, sustainable finance, among others. Next slide, please. Let me give you now some of the examples that I mentioned that have been innovative forms of financing here in the Philippines. We have something called the ETF. Why ETF? Why not ETM? Well, at the time, and this is with all due respect to our friends in ATV, I have very many friends there, sir, I hope you don't mind. At the time when this particular transaction was being done, or they wanted to do it, the ETM mechanism was not quite ready. And the investment house that was working on this was worried that the deal could fall through. So they chose to borrow the certain aspects of the ETM mechanism and then molded it to their own setup. So this is what you see in front of you, the AC Energy or ASEN example. Now, the energy transition financing. Obviously, they couldn't use the ETM term. They used the term ETF instead. It's an innovative financing solution. ASEN with BPI and RCBC, which are large banks here in the Philippines, was able to put up a 13.7 billion peso loan facility for its wholly owned subsidiary, the South Luzon Thermal Energy Corporation. This mechanism was technically the very first form of energy transition financing here in the country, in the Philippines. And through this mechanism, the company was able to fund the decommissioning of its coal-fired power plant, of course, shortening the facility's life by 15 years, which was slated for retirement by 2040. And through that mechanism, ASEN was able to divest all of the shares in that company, in SL Tech, and then the shares were acquired instead by something called the ETM Philippines Holding, and of course the insurance life assurance company. Then the proceeds of that divestment was supposed to be used by ASEN to invest in even further renewable energy projects. So it is very, very unique for at the time. No? This initiative certainly aligns with the Philippines government's call on the phase out of coal power plants here in the Philippines, especially in our country's power mix. We are aware, of course, and I think there have been some examples just shown a few moments ago, that there are other banks or financial institutions that are now using the ETM mechanism. Here in the Philippines, I'd just like to point out that there are banks and financial institutions that have moved to stop fossil fuel financing as a whole, which is probably why we certainly need the ADBC ETM mechanism or this particular ETF mechanism as examples, for us to move forward. This is fairly critical in terms of moving on in our journey to net zero, of course. And next slide. I only have these few slides now. I just wanted to show you the gender bonds now. I want to highlight the Philippines' first gender bonds. This is actually a very innovative issuance, and I have to laud the ADB for their support of this. ASA Philippines is essentially a microfinance NGO. Take note, a microfinance NGO here in the Philippines. No? The infrastructure development side of this is very significant in the sense that it is commonly recognized, of course, that there will be spillover effects to other parts of economic growth, so including the well-being of society through poverty alleviation, inequality reduction, and that's the goal here. This issuance by ASA, which I emphasize the point, is a microfinance NGO, which is part of what makes this so unique and so innovative, not even a publicly listed company. It highlights the positive impact that enabling frameworks can have on market activity. Now, I'd like to point out that this particular deal had the support of BDO and BPI. It was handled by BDO and BPI, which is two of the country's largest banks here in the Philippines in terms of total asset size, as well as Land Bank, which is a government-owned bank, the biggest government-owned bank in the Philippines. And originally, the way it was set up, though we have no clear categorization of gender bonds, we do have clear categorizations of social bonds here in the Philippines. And gender bonds qualify under the ASEAN Social Bond Framework under our memorandum circular. So this 5 billion peso corporate notes facility is supposed to be used to fund the working capital requirements of this particular project for eligible social projects, such as boosting lending to women entrepreneurs and micro enterprises in the Philippines. And it's very, very noteworthy in the sense that it emphasizes the importance of mobilizing finance or private investment, the support of government, because we supported this greatly, and of course the support of the multilaterals. Because as I understand it, part of the infrastructure deal here was done with the support of ADB. I understand the verifiers used here was also from support of the ADB. Now, through one of the funds, I think it was the Asia Catalytic Green Fund in particular, which was just mentioned a moment ago. So this is an example of a successful use case. And I'd like to let you all know that this was oversubscribed. I was informed that this was oversubscribed when it was finally issued. So we all know public funding is really not enough. We've seen traditional financing models that may be inadequate to bridge the full funding gap issue. So collaborative action, like what you see in front of you, between government, public sector, and private sector, certainly is necessary. So and with that last slide, I think I'm done. I'm good with that. In case there are any questions for us or the rest of the panel, I'm good. Thank you very much, Pa. I can end here.
Yes, thank you so much. So we conclude the presentations. We heard lesson learned from all the esteemed panelists as well as idea going forward. Given the constraint of time, I jump directly to a closing statement from each of you, basically to answer a question that I may raise. The question will be, what are the critical success factors from the implementation of specific financing scheme in the project? So each of you has 2 minutes to conclude. Thank you.
Okay, I will start with the 2 C's, commitment and collaboration. I think commitment because when it comes to infrastructure as an asset class, and it has to be multi-stakeholders involved from the very beginning. Even from the scratch, when we define projects, it can be a project within the authority cross government, central or local government. So commitment is, I think, the most important thing. We sometimes, as a project developer on behalf of the land ministries, we overlook to see the commitment and the capacity of, for example, local government in taking risks involved in the projects. So I think we also have to be fair in, I think, require condition, including the capacity enhancement to counterparty involved in the project, especially on the public side. Then I think the collaboration, I think, involve much greater scope of not only project planning, project preparation, financing, financial closing, and up until the operational and maintenance, until I think the end of the concession agreement. I think as the project goes on, I think there are many irregularities, there are many surprises, whether it is unforeseen and whether it is unexpected before, and it has to be a collaborative action between stakeholders involved in the projects. And that's what we call it, the collaborative action is very important, very crucial, and for that reason I think project monitoring and evaluation is key to the success and the sustainability of the PPP projects. Thank you.
Mr. Marat?
I would perhaps pick up from the comments made by colleague here. I think there are many participants and actors in any given infrastructure situation, right? Whether it's a project or a pool of assets or whatever it is. I think all of the actors around the situation need to show that extra level of risk appetite, if you will. It's never just one party that should do it. It's never just the government that should take on more risk. It's never just the equity investor that should take on more risk. It is never just the financier. It should be to address the problem that we have at hand. Perhaps all of the actors around the project should somewhat lean in and take that extra step and extra level of risk. And I think ultimately then it comes back to the point raised earlier. Once the project and the situation is up and running, let's not think of it as we press the go button and forget about it and it runs automatically. It doesn't. Issues come up, problems come up. So the various actors around that project need to then work to see how to resolve it and how to make sure the project continues to run and the business continues to run. Because every project is ultimately a business, almost a living organism. So that would be my reflections. Thank you.
Mr. Ping.
Yeah, thank you. So critical success factors, right, project. So if Pa Edwin has his 2 C's, then I would summarize it in 2 R's. So the 2 R's are risk and returns. So we must have risk mitigation measures in place. And if you recall my presentation just now, climate risk is getting more serious. It has to be addressed in all projects from the mitigation and adaptation angles. And over and above that, we have the baseline risks, right? The project design risk, project implementation risk, ENS risk, political regulatory risk for huge scale, big ticket size infrastructure projects. And of course, the investor must see good returns, right? And it goes to the business model. There must be, of course, demand for the infrastructure when it's in operations. So all this has to be taken into account and they make up the critical success factors. Thank you.
The unfortunate thing of being in a panel of many is that your point has been already mentioned by Mr. Ping. But anyway, so for us, it's the same. We are a bit downstream because we are equity investors. So a lot of times the risk-return trade-off is not, and including risk allocation among the contracting agencies, commercial investors, and maybe concessional investors. So that is one. The second is availability of capital, equity, concession financing, debt financing among all. And just 1 minute, I'm very grateful of being in this panel because I found out about UNOPS, for example. We do need to have a lot of collaborations. So we meet a lot. We can see a lot of institutions that you can reach out. Now, having said that, a second reflection is we have 200 million Pentagreen, 3 million grant from AIIB, a few hundred. But from your report, we need 2.8 trillion between in the next 7 years, which is 180 billion. So while I'm encouraged as an equity investors that there are a lot of kind of like creative financing, fisheries, I just found out, excellent. Would like to tap into that as well. But if we can, all the development institutions can actually scale up. There's a lot of creative things that has been discussed, but just the scale is just a drop in the sea. I'm just reading your report, by the way. So anyways, that's my reflection. Sorry for rambling because my point has been taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Pa. And yes, I guess to echo everything that the colleagues have said, but on top of that, I would also like to highlight, as I have mentioned in my presentation, sometimes it's not really the lack of capital that is really out there, but it's how do we unlock that capital through transparency in project preparation and ensuring that projects are bankable. And you know, from our experience, the UN can really play a strong role in supporting and transferring knowledge onto governments. And this is why we're getting so many requests from countries in the region to support them in project preparation to then be able to unlock the financing that is required for large and complex infrastructure projects and PPP arrangements. I think perhaps there's no one size that fits all ASEAN countries, but at the same time, there are some fundamental principles that we're all working towards, which is the Sustainable Development Goals and ESG, and we just need to find the right mechanism to unlock the financing that is required to ensure that we have a sustainable approach to infrastructure development going forward that is green and that is inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think in terms of the critical success factors, first of all, will be to identify, I mean, to recognize really that there is, the investors, they need to have potential returns. I think governments have not recognized this until recently. So they need to have some return. And how much that return is, this is a question for all governments and for everyone to really identify and discuss, no? But of course, if you reduce the risk, as several people have said, if you are able to, there are many ways that have been mentioned now and by the ministers on how to reduce risk, that will attract more private sector to accept a lower level of return, because it's always related to the risk, no? That's why a second thing will be to identify standardized solutions. When something is very new, the private sector, they don't like it. They feel that this is very risky. So we need to find standard projects, standard ways of doing things, of identifying and structuring projects that can be replicable. And once they are replicable, the private sector will be able to, more attracted to do those and able to accept a lower rate of return, which is also very important. No? The other is we need to have this at a scale. And I mentioned before different examples. No, we can have project by project, but we will be too slow if we do project by project. So we need to create national facilities. You know, PTSMI is a fantastic example, and others have been mentioned, but also developing capital markets and bonds. And my last point, you know, it's not that the private sector will be doing this on their own. I mean, the public sector, I think, still have a very important role to play in financing. The Secretary of the Philippines had mentioned only 2%, for many years, 2% of GDP was invested in infrastructure. This is not clearly enough. We need to increase, government needs to increase that percentage. If they want, there are many areas in which the private sector is not going to go. Some are difficult sectors, some are difficult regional areas where it's very difficult for them to go. So they need to increase that. maybe by increasing taxes even, and then by increasing the allocation or by reducing subsidies to other areas, liberating that money that could be used for infrastructure sustainable. Thank you.
Mr. Kelvin?
Yeah, I'll just jump very quickly. Although I noticed there were some very controversial suggestions by our ADB colleague just a moment ago, for the Philippines in relation to raising taxes. But anyway, the underlying theme I got from this very, very good discussion, I learned so much from this panel as well, is the 1C that Pak Edwin mentioned earlier, which I want to highlight in light of the private-public sector's part of this collaboration. A key takeaway clearly from today's discussion and everyone's presentation is the significance of collaboration, collaborative effort, whether it be through public-private partnership or coordination among the different countries, different regions, different governments, different markets and industry players from small to huge corporations. So collaboration seems to be the key here. But allow me to underscore also the importance of looking at the big picture. The journey to net zero obviously includes the efforts that are not fully renewable or sustainable yet. So we shouldn't overlook the possibility of initiatives that consider or touch upon transition. Now, in fact, in the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, where I sit as one of the co-chairs on Sustainable Finance Working Group, and where the Indonesia, OJK, by the way, is the chair currently, we are all currently working on the transition finance guidelines for ASEAN, together with other ASEAN member states. So, and of course, we have a consulting group working on that with us. So I guess this goes back to the initial point that Pak Edwin and ourselves and most everyone else on the panel has made. Collaboration is important, and I hope that's something we all remember. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all panelists. So with this, I formally conclude these sessions with the final word. Yet our journey towards sustainable infrastructure development is far from over. Let us continue to march forward with purpose, fueled by the conviction that together we can shape a future that benefits not only our generation but those that follow. Thank you and big applause to the panelists.
Thank you, moderator and all panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please give big round of applause for our discussion today. Once again, thank you, and moderator and all panelists, you may return to the seat. To our moderator and our all panelists, please kindly you may return to the seat. Once again, moderator and all panelists, thank you, and you may kindly return to the seat. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the end of our program today. We would like to invite Bapak Suminto, Director of Budget Finance and Risk Management of Indonesia, to deliver our closing remarks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bapak Suminto.
Distinguished panelists, participants, moderators, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the Indonesian Ministry of Finance, I wish to extend our gratitude to all distinguished speakers who have shared invaluable insights regarding sustainable infrastructure development. I also extend our appreciation to today's participants for their attentive engagement and fruitful discussion. It is a pleasure that I address you at the conclusion of this high-level dialogue. Our discussion has illuminated the crucial connection between infrastructure, economic growth, and the quality of life of our people. As we contemplate the road ahead, I would like to emphasize a few key points. It is important for us to go beyond conventional financing models to address the issue of financing gap in infrastructure development. Public-private partnership has been playing a significant role in our infrastructure development. Yet, with the growing needs for high-quality infrastructure, innovation and financing will need to evolve and transform. Engaging various sources, such as philanthropic, donor agencies, multilateral development banks, and institutional investors, while at the same time creating greater values by maximizing not only economic, but also social and environmental impact. Our challenge lies in opening these opportunities and cultivating an enabling environment to make it happen. Hence, in order to foster innovation and financing, the government needs to explore a broad range of mechanisms that can be aligned with the uniqueness of each project and sector to catalyze sustainable infrastructure investment. The government of Indonesia has exercised this approach through the establishment of the SDG Indonesia One, an integrated funding collaborations platform with a blended finance scheme managed by our PTSMI to support infrastructure development that is in line with the objective of achieving SDGs. We believe that engaging the private sector, including philanthropy, while promoting social and environment objectives in infrastructure development is not contradictory goals. Private sectors today play a crucial role in promoting ESG principles, in which many of them have incorporated the principles in their business operation and investment decision. As we currently would like to navigate a sustainable path, including in infrastructure development, collaborative action between government and private sector will be key to this achievement. While the government facilitates through regulatory framework and incentive alongside innovative financing schemes, the private sector can provide the funding and develop creative financing instruments. This will create new channels in infrastructure financing that bring greater benefits for the government, private sector, and society at large. The innovative spirit that lies at the core of our financial mechanism must be complemented by regulatory framework that create an enabling environment for broader private sector participations. Government must continue to be responsive and adaptive to ensure the regulations are relevant to the current conditions so that it can boost investor confidence and attract substantial investment, and at the same time serves the social and environmental objective. This is what the government of Indonesia aimed for when we introduced our regulatory reform on job creation, taxation, and financial sector. The Omnibus Law on job creation, for example, led the way to the establishment of the Indonesia Investment Authority. We have Pak Arif Budiman here, a sovereign wealth fund with the mission including to accelerate sustainable infrastructure development by mobilizing equity investment to reduce the reliance on debt financing. In our journey towards increasing collaborative efforts, the role of exchanging experiences and knowledge cannot be underestimated. Regional cooperation such as ASEAN, MDBs such as our colleague here from ADB and EIAB, and United Nations institutions like the UNOPS have important role in driving countries' innovations in financing and providing platforms for sharing experiences, knowledge, and best practices to create an enabling environment for further innovation. This can be complemented with building close relationship with private sector, particularly those having interest in investing in the Asian region. We can unlock the infrastructure investment potential through mutually beneficial collaboration. For example, Indonesia has been working with the ADB in establishing our country platform for ETM, Energy Transition Mechanism, which is another blended finance scheme managed by our PTSMI to mobilize financing for our energy transition projects. In conclusions, the pages of history are marked with examples where countries have responded to challenges through collaboration and innovation. Our cooperation in ASEAN to provide sustainable infrastructure development is in line with that spirit. Together, we can carve a path for our future where quality infrastructure fosters prosperity, inclusiveness, and sustainability in our development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bapak Suminto, for the closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the very end of our event. I would like to thank for all of the participations and enthusiasm and hope that we got lots of valuable insights from the dialogue and discussions that we have got today to contribute to the strengthening of Asian cooperations. And before we leave this agenda, please fill out the feedback form shown on the screen, or you can visit s.id/feedbackafmgm. Once again, before we leave this ballroom, please fill out the feedback form that's shown on the screen or by visiting s.id/feedbackafmgm. Again, thank you very much and have a good day. I'm Rima Budiarti. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om.